What's up guys, Chaos Shinobi here. This is What If Naruto Has a Dual-Wield Bloodline. Summary: Naruto was left behind in an insane plan made by his mother and father, and Kyuubi isn't happy about that, so she takes advantage of a serious attack and gives him a whole new lease on life with a new bloodline and a new dojutsu. Chapter 1: The Best Laid Plans. October 10th was a day of celebration, of festivities, and one of mourning. 5 years ago the Yondaime Hokage gave his life for the village hidden in the leaves, Konohagakure no Sato, in sealing away the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Everyone knew that he had sealed it away into one Uzumaki Naruto, and the majority of the villagers as well as a portion of the shinobi despised him and did their utmost to get rid of him one way or another. It was a repeating occurrence, but most especially on the anniversary of the Baiju's defeat. Anbu were already on top of the situation. Dog and Weasel had stopped the torture and summoned assistance. Weasel took it upon himself to deliver everyone that they had stopped to Ibiki, while Dog had rushed Naruto off to the hospital, hoping to save his sensei's son from dying. Once he had turned the young man over to one of the very few doctors who actually saw him as a child and not the Kyuubi reborn, he shined to the Hokage's office to report. "Hokage-sama, this is the last straw. If Naruto survives the night, I am taking him in and training him. The council can go to hell for all I care. Naruto is the last piece I have of my sensei, and I will be damned if I let him get hurt or have his growth stunted any longer." Sarutobi Hiruzen sighed as he thought through everything that had happened over the past few years. "Agreed, Hatake, agreed. I do need to reveal some things to you however, and for me to do that, I need to look you in the eyes, so please remove your mask." While waiting for one of his top Anbu to comply, the old man activated the privacy seals in the office and sat back in his chair. Waving his hand at one of the chairs in his office, Hiruzen ran his hand down his face and sighed. "Please take a seat, because this is an SS-ranked secret, and I am afraid you are not going to like what I have to tell you." Sitting down heavily in the offered chair, Hatake removed the dog mask and turned his full attention to the Hokage. "What is it that you would risk so much over to tell me, Hokage-sama?" Slowly looking up at the much younger man in front of him, Hiruzen gathered his thoughts for a moment. Namikaze Minato, Namikaze Uzumaki Kushina, and Naruto's two triplet sisters, Natsuko and Natsumi, are still alive. At the hospital, narrowly hanging onto life and deep in a coma at the moment, Naruto was slowly succumbing to the massive amount of damage done to his malnourished body and the many different poisons that had been inflicted on him earlier. As he slowly became more aware of what was going on again, he realized that he was in the sewers and he sighed aloud. The thing was that he had no one to turn to, as he had been living on the streets for the past year, unable to feel safe in the apartment that his Oji-san had provided for him. After walking through the sewers for a while, eventually he started hearing what seemed to be the sound of someone sobbing. He slowly started picking up speed until he entered a rather large room, where there was an area that was caged. Just beyond the bars he could vaguely see what appeared to be a young woman who looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. The only thing that prevented his approach was the fact that he could see several foxtails coming out from under her skirt and fox ears on her head. Staring at her in shock, Naruto started connecting the dots and realized that somehow he had the Kyuubi no Kitsune inside of him. Slowly approaching her and watching her carefully as he did so, he worked through the issues that came to his mind. Naruto was a highly intelligent boy. Contrary to the opinion of most of the villagers, he only hid his smart side due to the way the villagers had always treated him. By the time he had reached her side he had come to a number of startling conclusions. First and foremost in his mind was the fact that the Kyuubi was indeed a girl. Second was that the Yondaime Hokage hadn't killed the Kyuubi but instead had sealed her inside of him, and that led him to believe that there was possibly more that he had been lied to about. The third thing was that with as heartbroken as the Kitsune sounded, there was a rather large possibility that she wasn't as evil as everyone believed. Coming to a decision that would impact his life far more than even he knew at this point, Naruto crawled into her lap and did as he had seen many children and parents act. Slowly wrapping his small arms around her, he started to hug her and try to comfort her. Miyuki slowly realized that there was someone sitting there with her, and opened her eyes to see a young boy hugging her close trying to comfort her. Red eyes met Azure as she looked at him, and her eyes widened as she realized who it was that was there with her. "Naruto-sama, I'm so sorry," was all she could seem to stutter out. Watching as she opened her eyes, the first thing that came to his mind was that she was quite pretty, but he quickly got rid of that thought when he heard her apologize to him. "None of that Sama stuff please. I am not important enough for that, but that isn't important right now. I have questions that need answers and I'm hoping that you have some if not all the answers I am looking for." Nodding and wiping away the tears, Miyuki sat back against the wall, still holding Naruto. "So what would you like to ask me first?" Naruto, do you know why the Yondaime Hokage chose me to seal you inside of the Hokage's office? Hatake Kakashi was a person who didn't get angry easily. This was something that just about everyone knew. However, at that particular moment in time he was seething in rage, most of that directed at the man in front of him, since the source of his ire was nowhere around. So what you're telling me, Hokage-sama, is that my sensei and his wife came up with this Kakamemi plan to strengthen their clan's bloodlines by separating the Kyuubi no Kitsune's soul from its chakra, sealing the soul into Myototo. Then they were going to separate the yin and yang chakra and seal one into each of their daughters? Kakashi glared at the older man until he responded. Sighing as he nodded, Hiruzen couldn't help but feel partially responsible for what had happened, considering the fact that he had argued against their entire plan. That is an accurate summation of what they had planned. However, far worse is what else they had planned. They would act as if the remainder of their family had perished in the attack so that they could train their daughters to use Kyuubi's chakra as well as to train them in their clan's ways. They didn't feel the need to take their son with them because they thought that if he was trained too soon that the Kyuubi would try to corrupt him and take his body over. I argued with them for hours after they had accomplished the sealing, telling them that their plans to have the villagers see their son as a hero would never work, but unfortunately for Naruto and myself, Jiraiya and Tsunade sided with Minato and Kushina and left with them to help train their daughters. Gritting his teeth, Kakashi growled deep in his throat. So just when were they supposed to return, and what did they plan on doing to get him to accept them as his family when they just abandoned him? Bowing his head in regret, Hiruzen shook his head. They had planned on returning shortly after Naruto makes Shinran, and putting him on a team with his sisters. They were supposedly going to betroth him to his two sisters as well as one or two other girls in order to preserve their bloodline and to expand their clan, and that, along with teaching him the Hiraishin no Jutsu and the Rasengan, were supposed to make it up to him. I cannot be held blameless in this. No matter how much I argued with them, they were stubbornly set on this course of action, and I fear for Naruto's sanity when he learns what they have done. Standing up and beginning to pace, Kakashi thought about what he could do to help Naruto. Spinning on his heel, he looked up at the Hokage. I have an idea, and it will be painful at first, but it is better than the alternative. Intrigued, the elderly man looked up at Kakashi and motioned for him to continue. The problem with what Namikaze-san is planning is that he saw things turning out much differently than they have. I say that we act accordingly, seeing as how nothing has gone right where Naruto is concerned, and talk with him about everything, as I'd rather him hear about all this now, rather than later. This way we can help him while he's still young enough to learn that not everyone is against him, and we can also keep him here instead of possibly pushing him away. Opening his mouth to angrily retort, the Hokage paused as a thought struck him. You intend to start training him as soon as he gets out of the hospital, don't you, Kakashi? As the younger man nodded, Hiruzen sat back and thought about what Kakashi had just hinted at. From the examinations he had seen done on Naruto, he already had Chunin-level reserves, and he was only 5. Looking back up at the younger shinobi, he opened his mouth, paused, cleared his throat and crossed his arms over his chest. What is your goal in doing this, Kakashi? At the hospital. In Naruto's mindscape the positions were reversed now. He was still sitting in Miyuki's lap, but this time he was sobbing his heart out about everything that she had told him. The fact that his parents were still alive and had practically abandoned him tore him up inside. Then there was the fact that his parents had come up with a stupid plan to train his sisters for almost 10 years and then show up like nothing was wrong. To top it all off, they just wanted to use him to improve their bloodline, like he wasn't even a person to them, just something that they could use. As Naruto was emotionally venting, his mind was speeding through possibilities when his brain stopped as he remembered something that Miyuki had mentioned in passing. Wiping his eyes as he slowly put himself back together, he looked up into her eyes. Miyuki-chan, didn't you mention earlier that because you are a tailed demon that you regain your chakra over time, and that the Baijiu were the source of all bloodlines? Watching as she tried to figure out where he was going with this, he waited for her to respond. Because there were faults in the sealing array that your parents used as they were trying to avoid having to summon the Shinigami, there was an error made that allowed me to gain my chakra back. The reason for this and another very important error is because they were rushing and didn't have the time to really closely double-check everything. Here she paused and squeezed Naruto close to her. The other thing that you wanted to know is yes, I and my brothers and sisters are the origin of most if not all the bloodlines in existence. Why? Closing his eyes and laying his head on her chest, Naruto sighed as he thought about what he wanted to say. Miyuki-chan, is there any way that you could not only give me a bloodline or two, but also change my body or my blood so that I am not in any way, shape or form related to them? Rocking him gently as she thought about it, she racked her brain thinking about the possibilities and the risks. Finally looking down at him and smiling, she brushed her hand against his cheek. There is a way, but just to let you know, There are risks associated with this procedure. The other thing you need to know is that we will need to do this soon, as this last attack is more than the healing ability I give you by being inside of you can handle. Taking a moment to think about what she had just said, his eyes widened as he realized that he was slowly dying. I think I want to get Oji-san's opinion on this. Is there any way that we can bring him in here to meet you and talk to him about this? Nodding her head, she winced as she thought about what he was going to need to do to make this happen. Okay, first you are going to need to be awakened, so that you can let the Hokage know what he needs to do. It is going to hurt a lot, and you will need to focus on telling him that he will need to channel a little bit of chakra and put his fingertips on your forehead. I will do the rest from there, okay? Quickly agreeing with her, he braced himself for the pain as she forced him awake. Hokage's office. While they were discussing some of the things that they would need to accomplish, an urgent knocking sounded at his office door. Motioning to Kakashi to open the door, the Hokage quickly released the privacy seals which allowed them to open the doors. An Anbu with a cat mask was standing at the door, anxiously waiting for them to open it, and once it was open she immediately bowed. Hokage-sama, Naruto has awakened and even though he is in agony, begged us to come and get you. He said it's to do with his tenant. She hurried out of the way as the two occupants rushed out of the room for the hospital, both so stunned that they forgot about anything but moving as quickly as they could. At the hospital, moments later, the two men were standing in Naruto's room, eyes wide in shock at the amount of pain the young man was in. Kakashi walked closer and took the boy's hand in his own and squeezed it. Turning his head to see who was there, and seeing Kakashi and the Hokage, Naruto tried to grin and failed miserably. Looking from one to the other, he licked his lips as he struggled to talk. Closer please, I'm dying. Is still a chance, need to channel your chakra, touch my forehead, lot to discuss, please hurry. Quickly moving closer, they started to channel a tiny bit of chakra and touched their fingers to his head while they watched him bite back a scream of agony. As soon as they made contact with his skin, everything went black momentarily. Naruto's mindscape. They appeared in front of a cage in his mind and they gazed about momentarily in awe, before they focused on the voices they heard in front of them. Please Yuki-chan, please make the pain go away. It's going to hurt worse before it gets better Naruto-kun. First we need to talk to the Hokage and Hatake-san. The voice they heard this time was feminine, low and melodic, which drew their attention. Walking forward towards the cage, the scene in front of them stunned them. As soon as they could see beyond the bars, they saw a young woman with stunning red hair cradling Naruto to her. He was lying there in her lap, his little body shaking from the pain, when they noticed her ears and tails. That was when their minds had to stop and reboot. Of the two of them, Kakashi was the first to recover. "Kyubi, is a girl?" Naruto groaned and glared at him for a moment. "Her name is Miyuki, not Kyubi." "Kyubi is a title." Nodding at the young man, they both sat down right next to the cage. The Hokage gently placed his hand on Naruto's head, and smoothed down his hair trying to give him some comfort. "Naruto-kun, why did you need to talk to us?" Shaking his head to clear his mind, Naruto opened his eyes to look at the Hokage. "I know Oji-san, I know everything about Minato team and Kushinabaka. Their plan, the way they abandoned me, I know everything. What I need from you is for you to listen to Miyuki, because she has a way to not only save my life, but a way to make it so that they lose any and all say or control over my life. I will be able to receive a new bloodline, which would allow me to start my own clan, right Oji-san?" Stunned beyond all belief, the two men stood there in silence as Miyuki told them briefly about her history with Konoha and what had happened that night when she had attacked. She also told them about the Kitsune summoning contract that she would have him sign, gaining Konoha's 6th summoning contract, and also about what would need to happen in order for him to survive the night. The two men were skeptical at first, but as they talked and discussed everything in depth they soon came to see that this seemed to be the only way to help Naruto out. Thinking about everything that they had talked about, the Hokage leaned back against the bars of the cage. Turning his head to look at the Kitsune, he realized that there were a couple of other matters that they needed to discuss. "Miyuki, I only have a couple more questions for you. The first is, will he be able to choose his bloodline or will it be something totally at random? Secondly, have the two of you discussed any names, since I am quite sure that Naruto would prefer to distance himself as much as possible from them?" Taking a moment to think about her answer very carefully, Miyuki sighed and shook her head to clear it. "There is only so much manipulating I can do. Given that his chakra affinities are wind, water, and fire in that order, I can tweak his affinities to give him a Huton Kekkei Genkai using his wind and water affinities, a Futon Kekkei Genkai using his water and fire affinities, or even a Sheikuten Kekkei Genkai using his wind and fire affinities. The only definite abilities that will be included are a remarkably fast healing ability combined with an extended lifespan and slowed aging, as well as enlarged chakra reserves and a new dojutsu. Both of the men there stared at her in shock, though Kakashi recovered faster. That more than anything will get the council's favor quicker than anything, though. Will it be a single stage like the Byakugan or an evolving one like the Sharingan? Smirking at their stunned faces, she chuckled lightly. It will be a single stage like the Byakugan, with 2 lesser abilities and 1 major. The first is that it will be able to cast some rather difficult to dispel genjutsu on a target, which is a huge plus for anyone like Naruto whose large reserves generally prevent the usage of genjutsu. The second is the ability to target an enemy, and attack them with either thrown weapons or ninjutsu and have them locked onto the target. What this means is if the target creates Banshine or they Kawarimi with something or someone, the attack will follow them because it will lock onto their chakra signature. Both men whistled as they thought of the possibilities, when Hiruzen realized something. You said that there were 2 lesser and 1 major, and only described the 2 lesser abilities. Would it be too much trouble to ask about the final ability of his dojutsu? She smiled as she saw the grimace cross Kakashi's face. I will give you the general overview of this last ability. It is a bloodline key, meaning it can be used to unlock someone's bloodline ability, or seal it away either temporarily or permanently. Gasps were ripped from the throats of both men, as they began to fully realize the full scope of this new Kekkei Genkai. This is an amazing opportunity for you, Naruto. Have you decided on a new name and surname for yourself and your new clan? Naruto simply looked to the old man and gave him a small smile. After tonight my name will be known as Sojin Ikari and our Kekkei Genkai will be known as the Seigi no Namida, or the Tears of Justice. Pausing here he turned to look at Miyuki, and tilted his head a little. Yuki-chan, can you make my eyes a different color, like green? And make it so that when my dojutsu is active the only thing that changes is the shape of my pupil? At this point he was picturing it in his mind's eye, hoping that she would pick up on it. As he gazed up at her he watched as she giggled slightly and nodded at him. Can do, Naru-kun. But since we have agreed to get this done, I must ask a favor of both of you. I would like for you to push him in his training, which should start once I fix his body and he is out of the hospital. The biggest upset that I can think for those 2 is for them to come back and he is already a Jonin or a Nanbu. Think you can make it happen in the next 7 years? The 2 older men looked at each other, smiled and turned back to Miyuki. Most definitely, Miyuki-san. Ikari-kun, you will be working yourself into the ground if you want this to happen. Understand? Nodding he carefully stood and then walked towards the 2 men. Walking back through the bars Ikari hugged each of the men for a moment, thanking them profusely and asking them to thank Weasel and Cat for helping him as well. Turning back to walk into the cage, he stopped and tilted his head back to look at Sarutobi. Oji-san, we will give you approximately 5 minutes to set up the chakra containment seals. You will need to ensure that no one outside of this room will feel the procedure. Will that be long enough? Thinking about it for a moment, he nodded to them. Bowing to Miyuki he smiled as he rose. Please take care of him, he is precious to me and I have much to atone for where he is concerned. Simply smiling at him in turn, she nodded once and then ejected them from his mindscape. She then turned to her container. Okay Ikari-kun, I need you to prepare yourself because as much as I might wish it otherwise, this is going to hurt you. What needs to happen is that you're going to rip as close to 1/3 of the seal off as is possible for you. This will allow enough of my chakra and intent out to repair the damage done to your body as well as overwrite your current bloodline. This will also have the side benefit of making it a dominant male trait, meaning that any children that you or any male descendants have will have your bloodline over any other bloodline ability that marries into your clan. Nodding as he walked over to her, he wrapped his arms around her. I'm a little nervous, and worried Yuki-chan. You promise that I'll be okay? Wrapping her arms around the little one, she squeezed him gently as she laid her cheek against his hair. I promise that not only will you be okay, but that all the pain you are going through will be worth it. Pulling him away from her for a moment, she smiled down at him, and motioned towards the seal on the bars. It's time Ikari-kun, please be careful and pull at it from this side so that I can catch you, okay? Taking a deep breath, he nodded at her and turned to walk towards the seal. He ripped off almost the perfect amount of the seal and turned towards Miyuki right before he passed out, as at that exact moment in time all he knew was pain. 3 days later, his eyes fluttered open as he woke, and he struggled to recall where he was and what had happened. As everything finally came back to him, his eyes shot wide open and he quickly shut them and went into his mindscape. As soon as he showed up there, he raced back to the room he wanted and stopped just in front of the cage. Frowning as he looked at it, he closed his eyes and willed the room to change to match his imagination. Shortly afterward he opened his eyes and smiled widely as he took in the scene in front of him. Centered against the far wall of the bedroom was a king-sized bed with crimson silk sheets on it. The door on the left wall led to a rather spacious bath and onsen, while the door on the right wall led to a kitchen and small living area. He stuck his head out the front door and there was a small clearing next to a lake, with a force that seemed to stretch for miles. Smiling brightly, Ikari walked back to the bedroom and sat down next to Miyuki. Gently shaking her shoulder, he woke her up and sat back a bit as she snapped upright and looked around, blinking in a confused manner. As he took in her state of confusion, he noticed that she had on a leather choker with the kanji for seal engraved on it. "Ni, Yuki-chan, what do you think of my new and improved mindscape?" Staring up at him, she squealed and glomped onto him. "Ikari-kun, this is amazing. I have to say though, have you looked in the mirror since you woke up? You look totally different." Hearing that, he tore out of the room and into the bathroom, where he stood there stunned for a few minutes. He was a little over 4 feet tall now, and definitely looking healthier. His hair was straight and smooth, unlike before, and it was black with some red highlights. The eyes were no longer the cobalt blue that they were before, but were a deep and vivid emerald green. The biggest change though was his face, as it was more rounded than before, and his whisker marks were far less pronounced. Following along behind him, Miyuki had watched as he took in all the changes to his body. Smiling ever so slightly, she walked up behind him and gently embraced him from behind. "You like what I did?" Nodding rapidly was the only response she got, since he was rather speechless at this point in time. "I think you'll like what I did as far as your bloodline abilities as well, Ikari-kun. You now have both the Hudan as well as the Shakuden Kekkei Genkai, and when you channel chakra to your eyes, your pupils will change to a silver cross shape." In the next instant she was nearly bowled over by the young boy as he had whirled around and thrown his arms around her. She merely held him as he sobbed tears of joy. It was cruel beyond measure what his parents had done to him, and he finally had the love and care that he should have had from the very beginning. A few minutes later he stepped back and smiled at her, while wiping his tears away. "Thank you so much for everything you have done for me. I just wanted to know if I could call you Kasan." Shocked beyond belief at what he had just asked, she simply nodded and slowly started smiling. "If you want to, you can call me your Kasan. Can I ask why though?" Cocking his head to one side, he gave her a small foxy grin. "Because of you I have been reborn. I have been given opportunities that I never would have otherwise. Then there's the fact that you have always been there for me, healing me and taking care of me like a mother would." Wrapping her arms around him, she smiled and closed her eyes. "I promise you that you will never be alone again. Now there is one more thing we need to accomplish before you wake up from here, and that is getting you signed up as the summoner for the Kitsune clan." Shifting her body so that he could watch what she was doing, she slowly ran through the hand seals that were required for any summoning and explained all this to Ikari. Once the contract had appeared, she instructed him to bite his thumb and place his handprint on the scroll along with his name signed in blood. They both watched as the scroll disappeared and then walked outside. "I will help you in whatever way that I can. Most of it will be when I feel you're ready to actively use your dojutsu though. Although I will say that you can show them what it looks like when they ask you. One thing you must never do though is use your eyes abilities against someone who has a larger chakra reserve than you do, as it will literally backfire on you. It will only be a temporary effect, but it will happen." She looked at him seriously while waiting for his response, which was a rather rapidly given nod of affirmation. Grabbing him into one last hug, Miyuki squeezed him one last time and then held him at arm's length. "Go ahead and go, Ikari. Both of them are out there waiting for you to wake up." He simply nodded at her and focused on leaving the mindscape, smiling gently at her as he disappeared. Back in the hospital room, yawning slightly as he opened his eyes, he slowly sat up and stretched, smiling up at the 4 people who stood around his bed. "Oji-san, Weasel-san, Dog-san, Cat-san, good morning. It is morning, right?" Slipping around to hug him, Sarutobi Hiruzen smiled as he nodded at the young boy. "Hi, it is morning, Ikari-kun. How are you feeling this morning?" "Great, Oji-san. Now if I could just get out of here I would be almost perfect." Gentle laughter greeted him as he spoke, causing him to smile brightly up at everyone. "Ni, Oji-san, would you like to see my new dojutsu?" 2 gasps broke the silence that followed. The Hokage glared at the 2 who had made noise and cleared his throat. "I expect you to keep silent on this, you two." The QB confirmed for us that the Baiju are the source of a great many bloodlines, if not all of them, and because of the way he was injured several nights ago, the QB no Kitsune was gracious enough to give him a new bloodline including a never-before-seen dojutsu. He paused here and, smirking slightly, chuckled at the look of surprise on Ikari's face. "It's already active? I thought it would be some time before it could be activated." Shaking his head at the older man, he smirked back at him. "Nope, apparently the dojutsu will be activated when our ability to use chakra is unlocked. Take a peek if you want." Here he closed his eyes for a moment to focus a bit of his chakra to his eyes, and as he opened them back up he looked at each of them in the room and chuckled mentally at the looks in their eyes. All 4 of the others in the room were shocked beyond belief at the sight in front of them. His once blue eyes were a brilliant and piercing green, and with his dojutsu active, His once round black pupil changed into a brilliant silver Maltese-style cross. Glaring with it active, he sat up straight in the bed. From this day forward, Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto is dead. I have been reborn as Sojin Ikari, and my clan's abilities and Kekkei Genkai are to be held a secret until the Hokage, and I deem it time to reveal some but not all of the abilities. Hiruzen chuckled softly as he nodded in agreement. Well said, Ikari-kun, very well said. I can foresee you becoming a very capable clan head and leader in the future. Gather around and I will explain what I'm allowed to about what could become one of the most powerful clans and bloodlines here in Konoha. Testing, first assignments, and surprises. 3 years later, Training Field 7. He was exhausted. All of his teachers were there along with the members of the Shinobi Council, as well as the current Umbu commander, and they were currently judging his abilities and whether he was worthy of the leaf hit I ate. Thinking back over the last 3 years made him smile, as he recalled all the good times that they had shared and all that they had taught him as well as everything he had learned on his own. The first year had been brutal, as they had pushed him to the extreme, just in getting his body conditioned as well as getting his chakra control to where it needed to be. Flashback begins. Guy-sensei was in a league of his own when it came to conditioning his body, especially when it came to learning taijutsu. He had spent most of that first year constantly adjusting his chakra weights, since having Miyuki sealed inside of him, as well as having a nearly inhuman healing rate to boot, meant that his muscles and bones were healing up overnight. Once the green-clad man had learned this, he was ecstatic and gave him full-body workouts every other day. On the days they weren't working out, Ikari was learning the stances and moves of the Gukken, or strong fist taijutsu style. The biggest reason behind him learning this was because Miyuki had insisted that the moves were quite similar to the Genso no Ken, or Fist of the Elements style. His second year with Guy-sensei was quite similar to the first with two major differences. The first was that his chakra weights had the limiters reduced, meaning he was working out with far more weight added than before. The other was that he was beginning to learn the differences between the two stances, and training in the Genso no Ken. He wasn't allowed to add in any of his elemental natures, as both his sensei had wanted him to get the moves of his chosen style nearly flawless before adding anything to it. By the time he was finished with this year of training in taijutsu, he was wearing 500 pounds of weights, which was absolutely stellar for a boy of his age. By the time his third year began, Guy-sensei and Miyuki had determined that he was ready for the next step and had begun an extreme regimen as far as his taijutsu style was concerned. The first 4 months had been learning to add his water nature chakra to his body while sparring. They quickly learned that his natural grace and agility while fighting increased exponentially when utilizing this type of chakra. The other thing that they noticed is that his hits were as hard and unforgiving as a tsunami when he was attacking, or as gentle and deceptive as a stream when he was dodging or redirecting his opponent's strikes. The next 4 months were devoted to learning how to channel the fire nature chakra, and they quickly realized that his form while using this part of his chakra that his moves were a null defense. Also was that his aggressive side became more focused and intense, just like a fire. In fact, Guy-sensei mentioned in passing that this part of the style reflected the fires of his soul. The last 4 months were spent in learning the most difficult part of his style, learning how to harness the power of his wind nature chakra. They spent almost the entire first 2 months figuring out how to channel it, and once they did they rapidly figured out that he was going to be absolutely lethal once he had managed to mix his chakra natures in this taijutsu style. When he was channeling wind chakra through his body, his speed increased quite a bit, and depending on how he held his hands he could hit with the blunt force of a hurricane, or the gentle yet sharp force of a scalpel. Then there was Uegao-sensei who trained him in kenjutsu. They spent the first day alone trying to find him the right weapon or weapons, and finally decided on a pair of chakra-conducting kadachi. The first year was spent entirely on learning how to go through the katas of his stance, Kitsunetaro no Odori or the dance of the fox-tails. Fortunately for Ikari, the purple-haired kunoichi had a photographic memory, which was quite useful in learning the katas, stances and attacks of this sword style, seeing as how she had to enter his mindscape to learn it directly from Miyuki. They then spent that first year learning the basics of his style, going over them over and over again, to ensure that he had them committed to his muscle memory. From there they moved on to sparring with weighted wooden rods, which was quite enjoyable for the both of them. By the time the first year had passed, she had judged him ready to move on to the next step. The second year was all about ensuring that he was ready to start wielding his blades, and thus they moved on to weighted metal rods that were twice the weight of the wooden ones. After 6 months of this they had started teaching him the proper way to care for his blades as they started to incorporate them more and more into his training and even into sparring. The third year was spent exclusively in training him how to channel his chakra into the blades. They followed a similar training schedule as Guy-sensei did, starting with water, then moving on to fire and ending with wind. By the time they were done with this third year of training, Uegao-sensei had taught him everything she knew, and told him that he needed to continue to train and get experience, and to keep expanding on the training that he was already doing. His Oji-san got in on the training as well. In that first year was teaching him manners, the clan laws of Konoha, as well as teaching him how to write more neatly as a precursor to teaching him the art of Fuinjutsu. The old man was quite apt in his manner of teaching, and by the time he was finished with the first year of training with the Hokage, he was well on his way to becoming a Fuinjutsu adept. The second year continued on much like the first, only they added the other laws of Konoha, as well as getting into politics and diplomacy. It was at this point in time that they brought Hyuga Hiyashi and Narashikaku in on the secret, and they began to share their experience with the young boy as well. It was at the end of this second year of training that Ikari was attested in his Fuinjutsu skills, and was rated somewhere above the level of an adept in his ability to understand, create and even modify seals. The third year was much tougher as they only added more material on top of what he was already being trained in. Against his better judgment, the Hokage had him involved in the Uchiha incident. The way he had thought of to resolve it was nothing short of remarkable, as he had managed to get rid of the problem and was able to keep one of his sensei from having to become an Ukenin. The way he had come up with was that since one of the clans was about rise up in an attempt to overthrow the Hokage, that they apply one of the older laws that was still applicable in this situation. Since they had an inside person to give them the details, they had the Anbu go in and crash one of the clan meetings. Once inside, they were able to incapacitate all those who were guilty, and brought them to Moreno Ibiki and Yamanaka Ninoiki to interrogate and prove their guilt without a shadow of a doubt. Once they had separated the innocent from the truly guilty, they then held their trials and executions in public. Other than that whole mess, the third year moved along much like the previous two, with him becoming more like the clan head he would need to be. This was the year where they added the history of the clans as well as the history of Konoha on top of refining his abilities in Fuinjutsu. When they tested him at the end of the year, they were amazed to see his abilities were somewhere around the level of a master. The seals and the way they just seemed to flow from his brush were almost on par with his abilities in Genjutsu, just simply beyond belief. What they didn't know, however, was that the reason why his abilities in Fuinjutsu were growing so remarkably was due to his use of the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, or the Shadow Clone technique. Every night before he went to sleep he created as many clones as possible just to work on his chakra control and Fuinjutsu abilities. The first year he had been making 150 clones each night, putting 50 of them to work on various methods of chakra control, another 50 on practicing the strokes he would need to be able to actually write the seals, and the final 50 would read up on various seals and sealing methods. In the hours before he would wake up he would have them dispel in groups of 25 and 10-minute intervals so that he didn't end up getting hurt as he filed away what they had accomplished and learned from their experience. The second year he had bumped it up to 300 clones, and divided them into 4 sections. A fourth of them would be reading up on the creation and usage of seal tags of all kinds. Another quarter of them would be taking the time to learn how to create and modify jutsu, with another fourth experimenting with different types of seal tags, and the final quarter working hard on chakra control as well as his abilities with his dojutsu. The third year he had doubled the number of clones yet again, only this time he divided the workload differently. He sent 100 clones to work on his chakra control, another 100 to read up on the next level of seal creation and modification, the third group of 100 clones he had experimenting with the Huton bloodline, the fourth group was doing the same with his Shakuten bloodline, and the fifth group was busy learning how to master the jutsu he already knew. The sixth and final group was divided into 2 parts, 50 clones that were practicing the Fuinjutsu that he already knew and the remaining 50 were working on refining his control of his abilities with his dojutsu. It was only because of his massive chakra reserves that he was able to utilize this unique way of training. The training he was able to conduct in this manner gave him many years' worth of training in a very short amount of time. The last 2 trainers he had worked together with him and the areas that they worked on with him were the arts of ninjutsu, genjutsu, and the use of his dojutsu. It went without saying that Itachi-sensei and Kakashi-sensei were the 2 most suited for these 3 areas of training, and they consistently overlapped in their training in these arts. The first year they mostly worked on the basics, with Itachi helping him to train his dojutsu so that he wasn't using so much chakra in activating it. They drilled over and over again in his usage of the Seigi no Namida, so that when he chose to activate it, it only took a fraction of a second to activate and use, and he used a very meager portion of his chakra to do so. Meanwhile Kakashi-sensei was training him in the use of hand seals, and often had Ikari doing speed drills with him so that he could maximize the number of jutsu he could use in any given situation, as well as ensuring that he was confident enough with them to be able to focus on the amount of chakra he was molding instead of having to be concerned over whether he was able to make the hand seals correctly. The second year was much the same, only Itachi had decided to focus solely on genjutsu and dojutsu training. This year was spent learning about the different types and ranks of genjutsu as well as casting them on him to ensure that he understood how they worked. The only downside to this method of teaching was the fact that there was apparently a defense mechanism built into his dojutsu that detected when a genjutsu had been cast on him and automatically allowed him to either spike or cycle his chakra to dispel it. They ended up having to have Ikari form the genjutsu over Itachi instead, and once it had been dispelled he was graded on how well he had done. On the other hand, Kakashi had been having a much easier time of training the boy in ninjutsu as he was a very quick learner when it came to hands-on training. The academy's 3 jutsu were learned in a day, and he quickly set out to learn as much as he could in making the greatest use of the ninjutsu he learned. The first 3 elemental jutsu that he learned were all D rank, and they were Suten, Mizudan, Katen, Hinatama, and Fuuten, Kaze Dangan. By the time the year was done he could honestly say that he had learned a lot from Kakashi-sensei, as he had learned how to moderate the amount of chakra he poured through the seals and could charge the first 3 jutsu that he had learned with enough chakra to take them from D rank to high C rank in both range and damage. Year 3 was by far the most interesting training for the boy, as he truly exploded in his capabilities with his dojutsu and genjutsu. Itachi was extremely grateful for what he had done for his clan as well as for the village, so grateful in fact, that he had spoken with the Hokage about arranging a betrothal between Ikari and one of the young girls in his clan. They debated it fiercely for a few months before deciding that they would allow the young clan had a choice in whether it went through or not. By the end of the year, Ikari knew at least 2 genjutsu each of D rank, C rank, B rank and A rank. He could cast them quickly and was able to layer 4 genjutsu on a target as soon as he made eye contact. The best thing is that it always took 2 separate methods to break out of his genjutsu as long as they were cast with his dojutsu. The time that he had spent with Kakashi-sensei had paid off dividends in his abilities in combat. The 3rd year had been when he had learned about collaboration jutsu, like water and lightning or wind and fire. The fact that he was able to create a few B and C rank jutsu for his affinities as well as his 2 bloodline abilities was nothing short of spectacular. Flashback ends. Wincing as he stretched out his sore and aching muscles, the 8-year-old boy took a few more minutes to stretch his body out as it had been quite the rigorous workout. He had started at 8 this morning with the spar from hell with Guy-sensei, then after a 20-minute break, he had matched swords with Uegao-sensei. By that time it had already gotten close to lunchtime, and so they had stopped there and eaten before continuing on. Immediately following lunch had been Itachi, who had had to make a couple of clones for him to test his dojutsu and genjutsu on. The one who had really put him through the ringer though had been his Aniki, Kakashi-sensei. That had been an hour-long spar from the very lowest depths of hell, and the only reason he hadn't won had been because of his lack of experience. Finally he shook his head and stood tall, as he had nothing to be ashamed of and everything to be proud of at this point in time. Walking forward to where everyone was gathered around the Hokage, where he waited until they were done talking and he had their attention. Bowing low to the Hokage, he held it for a moment and then stood slowly. "I trust that my abilities are sufficient for me to wear the Hittite of the leaf and bear it with pride, Hokage-sama?" With a twinkle in his eye, he nodded and motioned for everyone there to take a seat. Smiling in gratitude to the old man, Ikari carefully sat Enseiza across from the Shinobi Council. Directing his gaze to the Hokage, he waited patiently for the eldest ninja of the village to speak. "Ikari-kun, it is indeed a pleasure to see how far you have come, and to get an idea for just how far you will go. I would like to take this time to get a feel for what your full capabilities are, and thus will turn the floor over for any questions from the council to either you or your teachers." Hiruzen then turned and looked to his left and then to his right and nodded. The first person to speak was Hyuga Hiyashi. "Sojin-san, the dojutsu that you have, what exactly are its capabilities?" Taking a moment to gather his thoughts, he quietly responded. "Hyuga-sama, the Seigi no Namida enables me to layer multiple genjutsu on any target with just a glance, and they require 2 or more different methods or attempts to dispel dependent on the strength of the person they were cast on. Once activated, they allow me to know almost instantly whether I have been subjected to genjutsu or if someone is currently attempting to attack me by using one against me. They also allow me to target someone by attaching an ultra-thin chakra string on mental command so that my jutsu will track them if they attempt to dodge or kawari me out of the way." Pausing for a moment, he cleared his throat and continued. "The ultimate ability of my dojutsu is the ability to sense if someone I am looking at has a Kekkei Genkai, and either unlock it, if they haven't already unlocked their ability, or to lock it away either temporarily or permanently. There is a weakness or two, but those shall remain as they are, known only to me." "No disrespect intended, Hyuga-sama." Nodding at his answer, Hiyashi sat back and pondered on what he had been told. The next person to speak was Narashikaku. "Hatake-san, In your honest opinion based on what you and your fellow nin have observed over the last 3 years, where would you rate his abilities? Taking a step forward and placing his hands directly on Ikari's shoulders, he carefully squeezed them briefly before responding. In all honesty Shikaku, I can only rate him on what I have seen, so there will need to be an answer on part of his training from the Hokage as well. I will give you a rundown on what we do know about his skills and abilities. Sojin Ikari is a close to mid-range fighter, who excels at Kenjutsu and Genjutsu. I would rate his Taijutsu at high Chunin, his Kenjutsu at high Jonin, and his Genjutsu at high Jonin to low Onbu level. His ninjutsu I would have to say is definitely at high Jonin, especially since a number of his attacks that he used earlier today were created by him, since we have very few if any jutsu that have ever been used by either Huton or Sheikuten bloodline bearers. Here he paused and gathered his thoughts once more before continuing. His capacity for stealth is definitely at Onbu level, his chakra control is also at Onbu level, and he currently has solid Jonin level reserves. I will defer to the Hokage's judgment in announcing the rest of his abilities. All eyes turned to the Hokage, who took a deep drag from his pipe before responding. Due to the fact that our only few ninjutsu masters are currently away, I have been personally instructing young Ikari-kun in the art. A lot of where he has learned has been in self-study from scrolls and other writings, and I would rate him somewhere above an adept in level. That is the best assessment I can offer at this time due to the fact that he has surpassed me in the creation and modification of seals a while ago. Ikari remained calm on the outside, but he was bouncing around like a little kid on the inside at his Oji-san and Aniki's answers to the question. Glancing around at the gathered clan heads as well as the Onbu commander, he sighed mentally as he waited for any more questions. They all appeared to be discussing the answers for a minute or two before Yamanaka Ninoiki cleared his throat. In your own words, what rank would you see him attaining today, and I would like for each of you to answer for yourselves. Gai-sensei immediately leapt forward and bowed. Honored council members, I feel that our most youthful student is most deserving of the rank of Chunin, at least until he has more experience under his belt. I personally feel that it would be a grave mistake to just make him a Jonin when he is fully capable of the most youthful teamwork I have seen in anyone in a long time. Here he bowed once more and stepped back. The next person to step forward was Uegao-sensei. I would agree with Gai-san in his assessment. Ikari-kun not only has the drive to improve himself, but to help others around him to improve and grow as well. I have learned a great deal from him in the last 3 years, almost as much as I have taught him, and I feel that he should receive the rank of Chunin. As she took a step back, Itachi-sensei stepped forward. I concur with my comrade's previous statements. I feel that he not only has the ability but the mentality to handle the rank. I would ask that he be assigned to a team that is shy person, so that way he can gain the experience he needs to grow and progress. Once he was done, he took a step back and Kakashi cleared his throat. I would make the same recommendation, but with the option to be picked up by the Onbu once he has been blooded. Here he paused as he felt Ikari's gulp through his hands and he squeezed his shoulders gently once more before continuing. His character is without reproach, especially considering how ill-treated he was before we took over raising and training him 3 years ago. He is loyal, hard-working, and has a do-or-die mentality that will see to having both the mission accomplished as well as his entire team returning with him one way or another. Kakashi stopped there and stepped back amongst his other comrades. The Onbu commander tilted his head in acknowledgement and acceptance of his statement, and then looked to the Hokage and nodded in response. Tilting his head forward for a moment, Sarutobi Hiruzen hid the tears of pride as he blinked them away. The fact that Ikari had come so far in such a short amount of time meant a lot to him. Looking back up at Ikari, he cleared his throat before speaking. Having heard the assessment today, I must say that I am very proud of you, Ikari-kun. You have persevered when many others would have given up. You have struggled and fought your way through a training regimen that many your age or even a little older than you would consider insane, and you not only passed your final exam, you have completely obliterated any and all expectations that there could have been for you. Now if there are no objections, he paused here for a moment, and looked at each face there only to see approval. It is my pleasure to congratulate you and say that you have earned this. Rise and accept your Hittite and vest, Chunin Sojin. Blinking back tears of gratitude, he bowed low to the ground before rising to his feet and shakily moving forward to pick up the items that the Hokage had set in front of him. Throwing the vest on, and then wrapping the headband around his right bicep and tying it off, he then returned to where he had been sitting and stood there, turning to face the council once more. Smiling broadly at the young boy before him, Sarutobi stood and looked around at everyone there before speaking up once more. It has been more years than I can remember since we have seen the establishment of a new clan. I have received a request from Uchiha Itachi, the current head of the Uchiha clan, for the creation of the Sojin clan, with himself as a sponsor. According to the laws of Konoha, the only people who have any say in the creation or addition of a new clan are the Hokage as well as the other clan heads. Turning to Ikari, He smiled once more. Ikari-kun, if this request is accepted and passes, until you turn 16 or become a jonin you will need to have someone who will represent your clan in council meetings. Do you have anyone in mind that would be able to do this for you? Getting a nod from the young man in question, Hiruzen turned his attention once more to the council members in front of him. Anyone have any reason why this request cannot be accepted? Aside from the fact that there is only the one member for now, that is. Seeing that no one there seemed to have any objections, he smirked as he turned back to face Ikari. Chunin Sojin, upon unanimous decision of the council, you and your family are now a clan of Konoha. Seeing as there is only yourself and no one else, we will need to initiate the Clan Restoration Act. You will need to find a minimum of 3 women and be married by your 16th birthday to at least one of them. Is that understood? Grumbling mentally about this, Ikari nodded. Hi Hokage-sama, I do have one question though. It is acceptable that I have the final say in the matter of my marriages, and that they are not to be forced or coerced, is that correct? Getting a nod and a soft smile in response, he sighed in relief. Taking a deep breath, he turned and faced his teachers. Yugao-sensei, Wanzen, would you do me the honor of accepting the role of being my clan's representative on the council until I either come of age or achieve the desired rank? Stunned beyond belief, it took her a moment to respond. Smiling at her honorary Ototo, she nodded to him. Hi, Ototo, it would be an honor to assist you. I appreciate your trust in me, and will never give you cause to doubt me. Turning back to the council he smiled and bowed. Thank you for supporting me in this, I am eternally grateful to my teachers as well as each of you for all that you have done for me. I await your orders Hokage-sama. Looking through the papers in front of him, he shuffled through them looking for the right one. Finding it, he cleared his throat before reading from the sheet. Chunin Sojin, you are to report to your team's training ground, which is Training Field 18, in the morning at 8 a.m. Your new team is Chunin Inuzuka Hitomi, Chunin Aburame Takehito and Jonin Sensei Yasumasa Hibara. Any questions? Shaking his head, Ikari smiled internally. Things had been going great for him and he was finally starting to reach some of his goals. Blinking as he looked around at everyone standing there, he was a little surprised at seeing Itachi-sensei approach him. Sojin-san, it is an honor to have helped you to get here, having achieved 2 of your dreams this day. I have with me a request, which will help both you and a member of my clan. I would ask that you hear me out and think about it before responding if you would. A single nod of Ikari's head was his response. Pulling out a scroll from one of his pouches, Itachi handed it to the boy. In here is a betrothal agreement between the Uchiha and Sojin clans. All it needs is both of our signatures as well as your designated clan representative. I know how you feel about arranged marriages, Ikari-kun, but I ask that you give her a chance and see where things go. You will have until your 15th birthday to choose whether to finalize said contract once it has been signed, and the only requirement that there is that the both of you spend time together and get to know each other. Deep in thought at the moment, Ikari gently weighed the scroll in his hand. Unlike his former family, Itachi was giving him a choice in the matter, which was a huge plus for him. Also there was the fact that he had absolutely no respect for the Namikaze or Uzumaki clan heads, but he had quite a bit for Itachi, which also weighed heavily in favor of him accepting the contract. Removing the binding around it, he quickly scanned the document to see if there was a name listed, and was stunned by the name he found there. Looking up at Itachi, he nodded at the man. I must admit to being a little stunned at name listed here, to be perfectly honest. Setsuki-san was one of the only children I know that would play with me before my change. Is she aware of anything to do with me? Shaking his head at the youth's question, Itachi mentally sighed with relief as it seemed that he was leaning towards accepting the contract, which would be largely beneficial to her since her only remaining relative was an older brother who had been an eager participant in the attempted coup, and had been executed with the rest of the traitors. This would give her a fresh start, and would bring her out of the depression she had been in ever since. By the same token, with the dowry that he and his mother had decided to put into the contract, which was a considerable sum along with a rather large house and property to help the young clan out, there was very little reason he could think of to deny the contract. Deep in thought himself, Ikari had pretty much noted many of the same things that Itachi just had, and sighed aloud. Turning to Yugao as he re-rolled the scroll, he bowed his head and spoke. Wanzen, I'm inclined to agree, but I bow to your wisdom in the matter. Having given it some thought and glancing over the terms, they are being quite generous in helping our new clan in our humble beginnings. He then stood and smiled at her for a moment before becoming serious once more. However, here he looked to Itachi and the Hokage with determination in his eyes. I must insist that if we agree to the betrothal that she is informed of who I used to be, what I contain, and who my former family is. I also beg of you to consider her desires in this, and if she doesn't want to go through with this for good reason, that we let the matter end there. Is this acceptable? Taking a moment to look at Ikari, he nodded and smiled softly. I don't think she'll have any problems with it. That and the house and property sit on land that is on the edge of the Uchiha and Hyuga clan lands, so you will have more than enough room to grow. Tilting his head in thought for a moment, Ikari smiled. Perhaps we could discuss this over dinner tonight? Itachi looked to Uegao, who simply shrugged and nodded. Turning his gaze back to Ikari, he nodded as well. That would be acceptable, Ikari-kun. Shall we say 6:30 this evening? Returning Itachi's gaze for the moment, Ikari smiled and nodded. Arigato, and that is indeed an acceptable time. He then bowed to everyone present, turned to the Hokage and looked at him with a questioning gaze. Receiving a nod from the older man, he turned and approached Uegao and walked away talking with her, leaving the council to chuckle at his departure. Walking up to the two men standing together, Hiashi chuckled slightly as he nodded at the young boy who had just left. Hiruzen, Itachi, something tells me that youth is going to go places, yes? Nodding his head in agreement, the Hokage simply laughed as he watched the departing group of ninja. Itachi, something tells me that it might be a wise idea for me to be available later on this evening, because I am almost positive that your two clans will become quite close in the coming years. I agree, Hokage-sama, I totally agree. Chapter 2, The Next Step on the Path. 2 years later, turning in for the night, Ikari sighed in relief. The past 2 years had been most beneficial for him in multiple ways. The first was that his first meeting with his former family had possibly been pushed back another 3 years. The main reason for that being that they had improved the academy's curriculum due to quite a few injuries and deaths that could have been prevented had the Junon actually received more in-depth training than just the basic techniques that were covered, as well as ensuring that the trainees were physically fit. That had increased the graduation age from 12 to 13. And then there was the mandatory time as a Junon before being able to go to the Chunin exams that the council had established, which meant that there was a 2-year time requirement to be able to go from Junon to Chunin. Due to this delay in graduation, as well as the time requirement, there was a small possibility it had pushed the confrontation with his former relatives from when he was 12 to 15, and with the test he had undergone earlier today and trying to join the Onbu, he was certain that by the time he actually had the confrontation with his former family that he would be a Jonin and be firmly entrenched as a clan head. While he was fairly certain that he did well enough to pass, he was still concerned because his age might be the one factor in him not being accepted. That, and he was concerned about the possibility of his ex-relatives coming back earlier to ensure that their daughters were made Junon. Then there was the new house that he had been living in for the last year and a half. He had been pleasantly surprised by the reaction he had received from Setsuki, and that had been the deciding factor in choosing to sign the contract. Flashback start. The dinner had been amazing, but Ikari could already tell that something was worrying Setsuki, and he knew that he wasn't the only one to pick up on it. Once dinner was over, the conversation slowly became heavier, as both Itachi and Mikado, his mother and chief advisor in his role as the Uchiha clan head, directed the conversation toward why everyone was there this evening. Eventually, the Uchiha matriarch smiled and cleared her throat. Setsuki-chan, there are multiple reasons for why we are all gathered here tonight. The first is to clear up the mystery concerning one of your dearest friends, one Uzumaki Naruto. I promised you when you were much younger that I would help you to find him or find out what happened to him, and I am happy to tell you that he is alive and well, even if he has changed more than you might have expected. Sitting up straight with a small smile on her face, the first one that anyone had seen on the 7-year-old's face in quite some time, she looked expectantly at her Oba-san. I had hoped so, Oba-san. Where has he been all this time? What happened to him? When will I see him again, or has he forgotten all about me? Right as she stood to run to her room, her hands over her face, she was wrapped up in a hug from behind her. Then she heard a familiar voice in her ear. Suki-chan, I never forgot you, I promise you that. I had to get strong though, because I found out some rather disturbing things about my family, and because of certain things that you will be made aware of tonight, I had to train in secret for the last 3 years. I know that I owe you an explanation at the very least, and I promise you that I will give it to you. Believe it. Hearing those two very familiar words, she spun around and looked at the person who was holding her, and since his eyes were closed she peered closely at his face, tracing the faint lines of the whiskers on his cheeks with her eyes. Wrapping her arms tightly around him, she buried her face in his neck while crying softly. He had maneuvered her carefully, and sitting back in her chair, Ikari had placed her in his lap and rocked her as he comforted her. Before they left that night, he had told everyone their everything, and had even Sasuke and Mikado stunned by the level of betrayal that had happened to him. None of them batted an eye when he told them that he was the container of the Kyubi no Kitsune, although all 3 women present crowed about how the most powerful demon lord was a female. What she was stunned about though was the fact that Miyuki Kawasan had changed his body so that not only was he not related to his former family anymore, but that he had been given a new bloodline and was the beginning of a whole new clan as well. Setsuki thought about whether she would be allowed to marry him, and was a little put out about the fact that she would have to share him. "What do you mean that I will have to share you if I want this?" Smiling at her gently, he placed a finger to her lips. "Suki-chan, can you share me? I want you to know that I will consider us all as equals under our roof. Only in public will I appear to greater, and that is only because I will be the head of our clan. In any important decision you and the others, whoever they might be, will have an equal say in what we choose. Can you accept this?" Pouting cutely at him, she turned and thought about it for a few minutes. On the one hand, she knew that he would have to have at least 3 wives. She knew what kind of person he was, and knew that growing up he had very little love and affection in his life, but amazingly enough he still had a big heart, and she knew that she wouldn't be loved or cared for any less than the others. Setsuki was also very grateful that she wouldn't have to be a trophy wife, someone who was only kept around for her looks and to pop out babies. As she tossed the idea around, Ikari was quietly carrying on conversation with his host and his family. They covered just about any topic you could think of, from his training regimen, to the ideas he had for getting back at certain people for just foolishly abandoning him. After a few more minutes she squeezed him gently to let him know that she had made her decision. Gulping slightly at the attention on her, she cleared her throat afterwards so that she could speak. I accept the proposal. I know Ikari-kun would never treat anyone precious to him badly, and to be honest I think I'd like the opportunity to grow together with him over the next few years, so that we can get to know each other better." Flashback end. In fact, the house had needed so much work done, that it was better off being torn down and rebuilt. He and Itachi had come to an agreement that they would match every single ryo that he put into the new building, and that was mainly due to the fact that they figured that he wouldn't be bringing in all that much until he gained more rank and was able to take on harder missions. What they still didn't know is that he had his clones steadily making sealing scrolls and explosive tags on the side, and that he was making around 15,000 ryo each month above and beyond what he was making with missions. It was part of the reason why they had managed to have a new house built so quickly. And with all the extra cash he had coming in, he had personally commissioned a few extras, like the mixed bathing onsen, the training dojo, and a flower garden with a pond. Laying there in bed as he prepared to go to sleep, the youth sat there and mentally estimated how much he had saved up over the last 2 years and whistled quietly as he figured he had saved up almost 500,000 ryo in the last 2 years, and that wasn't counting interest earned either. Smiling to himself as he fell asleep, he knew well that his future family wouldn't suffer the way he had growing up. The next day, Ikari had awakened much refreshed this morning, showered and gotten dressed in his standard clothes. Black hanbu pants with pockets running down the legs, a sleeveless mesh undershirt with a dark green long-sleeve shirt over it with his black shunin vest over the top. He tied his hitai around his left bicep and laced up his black steel-toed boots. Walking downstairs he greeted the elderly housekeeper that he had hired on as soon as the house was complete. "Ohio Mika-san. How are you this morning?" She turned as she finished with breakfast and smiled at the young man. "Ohio Ikari-kun, I am just fine, and how did you sleep last night?" Grinning widely, Ikari chuckled. "I slept quite well, thanks. Training does wonders for ensuring that one sleeps well at night. Is there anything we are in need of that I can get for you while I am out and about today?" Shaking her head, she slid a plate with eggs and toast in front of the young man. "No, we are good for now. You do remember that you have a meeting in half an hour at the Hokage's office? Yes." Nodding absent-mindedly, he grinned as he felt that he had indeed passed the test he needed to in order to join the ranks of the Anbu. It was then that he thought of a way to celebrate his passing the test. "Mika-san, if it's not too much of a hassle, can I ask you for a favor today?" Getting a nod from her, he grinned as he finished the last of his food and swallowed. "I was wondering if I could persuade you to pick up something extra special for dinner tonight, enough for 8 people." Nodding as she took the plate from his place at the head of the table, she paused for a moment. "Something fancy, Ikari-kun?" Shaking his head for her to see, he stood and prepared to walk out the door. "Nothing too fancy. I would like to sit down and have a family dinner with all those whom I consider my family who will be available tonight. And by the way, that includes you as well, Mika-san." With a quick hug and a wink, he quickly ran out the door, hearing her chuckles as he did so. The Hokage's office. Arriving about 5 minutes later, the young man knocked on the doors to Oji-san's office and opened them once he had heard someone tell him to enter. Walking inside, he kept his eyes focused on the Hokage, all the while taking everyone that was around him, whether they could be seen or only sensed. Bowing to the Hokage, he stood once more, his face set in serious tones. "Chunin Sojin reporting as ordered, Hokage-sama." Standing from behind his desk, he went through a couple of hand seals and activated the improved privacy seals in his office. Once he was done with that, he turned to all the others who were in his office and motioned for them to drop their masks. Cat turned out to be Yuigao, dog was Kakashi, weasel was Itachi, and the Anbu commander, otherwise known as Wolf, was Hyuga Hana. Clearing his throat to get everyone's attention, the Hokage began to speak. Sojin-san, you have been called here today to join the ranks of the Anbu. You will be joining the Anbu Black Ops Squad, under the command of Hatake Kakashi, and whose members are as follows: Weasel, who is their long-range combat specialist and interrogator, and Cat, who is the team's assassination and close combat specialist. There are 3 masks that you can choose from here, and they are the Hawk, Boar, and Fox masks. Once you have chosen your mask, then we will ask you to take off your shirt to receive your tattoo, which will designate you as an Anbu. Standing and approaching the desk, Ikari looked over the masks that were there and quickly picked up the Fox mask. Taking it in hand and stepping back, he looked to his Aniki and handed him his Chunin vest and mask with a nod, and then stripped off his Hittite and his long-sleeved shirt. Sitting on Seiza in front of the Hokage, he looked up at the old man with a smile on his face. I'm ready, Hokage-sama. Smiling down at the young man, he then turned to Yuigao and Hana, who were the tattoo specialists in the Anbu, and motioned them forward. Yuigao looked down at her Ototo and smiled widely. You have come a long way, Ototo. As a special gift for today, Hana-san and I will give you one more tattoo, free of charge, wherever you would like and whatever you would like. Thinking about it for a moment, he was struck with inspiration. While Hana was busy tattooing the Anbu mark on his left shoulder, he smiled up at his onesie. A fox head sitting directly over 9 fox tails arranged in a circle, directly over my heart. She changed my life for the better, and this will be my clan's new symbol, minus the fox head of course. Nodding her head, Yuigao waited until Hana was finished and then asked Ikari to stand so that they could do the requested tattoo. Once it was done, he looked down at it and smiled. That one is for you, Ka-san. Thank you, Ikari-kun, I appreciate the touch. There is something we will need to talk about though, in regards to your clan and the first betrothal you have arranged, as well as any other wives you marry. Okay then, how about before dinner this evening so that we can discuss any possible courses of action with all who might be involved. Once he had gotten the feeling that she agreed with his timing, he looked up at everyone there and grinned. Well, this is another step towards my goal, Haoji-san? Gently smiling at the young man, Hiruzen nodded. Indeed it is, Ikari-kun. Now then, I have a mission briefing for all of you in the morning, so be here at 8 and don't be late. Dismissed. Getting the attention of the 3 Anbu he needed to invite, he motioned for them to follow him. Once they had left the Hokage Tower, he led the way to one of the parks nearby. Once there, he threw down a disposable privacy seal that he had created and then handed each of them an invite. The invite is to a family dinner at my home tonight. I know that we can't discuss certain aspects of our lives, not even with our closest of loved ones, but I kinda had a feeling that I would pass the test and figured that it would be a good reason to celebrate tonight, as a family, because some of you are family already to me, and a few of you will become family to me in time. Looking around at all 3 of them, Ikari smiled as he saw them all nod. Well then, let's get me kitted out with the Anbu gear I'm going to need, ni? Everyone simply smiled at the young man and then shined away. Next day, having awoken early the next morning, the young heir had conducted his morning business and gotten dressed in his new attire. A new sleeveless emerald green shirt that was covered by a dark blue Jonin-style Anbu vest, dark blue Anbu pants and the steel-toed boots, and his Hittite was the final touch as he finished getting dressed. On the way out the door, he let Mika-san know that he was going to be gone on a mission and didn't know how long he was going to be gone for. Disappearing in a swirl of ice shards, he reappeared in the Hokage's office with his mask on and ready to go. Seeing as he was the first one there, and that not even the Hokage was there yet, he covered himself in the genjutsu and hit his chakra levels and then waited for everyone else to get there. 5 minutes later everyone else was there and he pulled down the genjutsu and stood next to Weasel. Glancing up to see that they were all there, the Hokage sighed mentally. I have 2 missions, so I am going to need the 4 of you to split up. The first mission is to assess the efforts and capabilities of the rebels in Mist. From there, if your assessment is favorable, the 2 that go are to remain and assist them. Do not get captured by their enemies as they are on a witch hunt against bloodline users. One of the 2 who will be going on this mission is Fox, as he will be needed if the assessment indeed turns out favorable, and the reason for that is because their Yondaime Mizukage is the Jinchuriki of the Sanbi. Stopping here for a moment, he could feel the tension and realized that there wasn't anything he could do about it now but pray that everything turned out well. The other mission is to remain off the books for now, because it involves subterfuge of the highest level due to the nature of the people you will be in contact with. I need 2 of you to deliver a scroll to the Sennin Jiraiya, and let him know that training mission or not, if he doesn't get back on the ball with his spy network, I will have him marked as a nukenin and put a kill on sight order out for him in the bingo books. If he argues with you or tries to blow you off, let him know that twice now in the last 6 months I have had to find out about some rather important events that could have had major ramifications from his spy network, and even then it was almost too late for us to do anything about it. Not to mention that they have told me that he has not been in contact with them for over a year. Giving himself a moment or two to calm down, he sighed and rubbed his temples with his fingers. My apologies, I do not mean to take these things out on you, but lately I find myself wondering what the hell I was thinking allowing those idiots to carry out their foolish plan. I want you to make your plans and depart no later than noon. Looking around for a moment, he located the 2 scrolls he was searching for and tossed them to Dog. The blue-edged scroll contains your contact location and passwords to meet up with your contact in the port city of Atazu no Odori. The green-edged scroll is the one that I need delivered to Jiraiya. Once you have taken care of that, then and only then will the 2 of you link up with the others who will be in Mizuno Kuni. Understood? 4 replies of "Hi, Hokage-sama," were his answer and he nodded. Good, then all I have to say is good luck and return safely. His only response was 4 nods and then they vanished in various methods of sunshine. Once they were safely out of sight and hearing, he sagged back in his seat and tilted his head back. May Kami watch over and protect you all. Once they had reappeared at the Anbu training ground, Kakashi removed his mask and turned towards the others. After gazing at both Itachi and Uegao for a moment, he sighed and looked to Ikari. I know that you have been in life and death situations before, Ototo. I want you to promise me something though. I need you to promise me that you will follow Itachi's instructions. You are important to me, and I am unsure of how long it will take us to locate our target and link back up with you. Taken aback for a moment, Ikari nodded and sighed. You have my word that I will do my best to follow Itachi's instructions. Smiling at his younger brother, Kakashi sighed mentally, relieved at how easily that had gone over. Clipping his mask back into place, he straightened his shoulders and turned to Uegao. You're with me, Cat, Weasel and Fox. You are to head out to the contact's location and be there in 3 days. Good luck and be cautious. He then disappeared in a swirl of leaves along with Cat, leaving the other 2 to their own devices. Fox turned to Weasel and frowned even though he knew the other man couldn't see it. I need to stop by and see Suki-chan before we leave, just to let her know I'm going to be gone for a while. Nodding at the young man, he smirked at Ikari, grateful for the mask that he wore so that he wouldn't be able to see it. Disappearing in 2 swirls of fire, the Anbu training grounds were soon left empty. 3 days later, once they had arrived near the outskirts of Atazu no Odori, they slowed down and after ensuring that there was no one around them, removed their masks and used a henge to conceal their looks. Looking around as they walked around the town, they stopped by a dango stand to grab some food and continued on. About a half hour later they found the inn that they were supposed to meet their contact at and headed inside. Once they had arranged for a room for the night, they then took a seat at table where they could observe everything and everyone going by. After ordering a bottle of sake and some food, they sat there quietly conversing for a little over an hour before someone came in that caught Ikari's eye. Motioning to Itachi where only he could see, he communicated using Anbu hand signals that their contact had just shown up. Getting a nod in return, he stood and approached the table that she was sitting at with one other person, figuring that since he was the more unassuming of the 2 that he would be greeted with slightly less hostility than Itachi would have. Sitting down at the table he smiled lightly at the woman across from him. The waters are cold this time of year. Catching the slight widening of her eyes, he watched as she nodded and spoke quietly. Yes, they are indeed. I just hope that the fires will keep us warm. Have we kept you waiting long? Shaking his head, he signaled Itachi to join them. No, as we just got into town today. My companion and I have some questions for you before we leave with you. He then turned to Itachi once she nodded and motioned for him to take over the conversation. Taking a moment to gather his thoughts, Itachi nodded to his younger comrade before turning to their host. I'm thinking that we should discuss this in a more private location. We have a room upstairs and I think it might be best if you and your companion joined us so that we aren't overheard. Smirking, the woman turned to her companion and looked at him in a questioning manner. He returned her gaze with certainty and nodded back at her. She then stood and motioned for them to lead the way, which Ikari did, followed closely by the 2 strangers and Itachi as the rearguard. Upon reaching their room, Ikari slapped a seal on the door and channeled a little chakra into it. Then slipped in some hand seals after biting his thumb, and slammed his hand into the floor. Kushios no Jutsu 2 three-tailed kitsune, one that was an icy blue in color and the other the blazing reddish-orange of a fire, popped out of a small cloud of smoke and looked to their summoner. What do you require of us, Ikari-sama? Hiding his grimace, he spoke quietly to them, yet still loud enough to be heard by everyone there in the room. Greetings to both of you, Shimo, Takibi. I need the 2 of you to make certain that we are not overheard by anyone. Do not attack and employ your stealth skills to observe and report any chakra usage outside of this room within 500 meters. Both nodding at their summoner, they popped out of the room as Ikari looked up at his partner. We should be secure now, so we can begin any time you wish to. This got Itachi's attention and he turned towards the pair who were just sitting there, somewhat stunned by the ability of the young man. "The first thing that we would like to know is your names. I am Uchiha Itachi, and my partner is Sojin Ikari." It was at this point that the two of them dropped their respective henge and resumed their normal looks. The woman nodded and pointed to her companion first. "This is Ao, and my name is Terumi Mei." I must admit to being impressed as I wasn't expecting someone so young. Smirking just a bit, Itachi replied, "True, but we weren't expecting to meet with the leader of the rebels and her second-in-command either." "Touché. Now what questions do you have for us? Because I'll be honest with you, the reality of things is that we are in dire straits and we will need the aid of a Jinchuriki if we are to end Yagura's reign of terror and bloodshed." Motioning to his younger partner, Itachi let Ikari take the floor. "That would be why I'm here. What can you tell us as far as the numbers you are up against and what condition your own troops are in?" Mei turned to Ao and nodded. Sighing a little, Ao shook his head a bit. "We are outnumbered 3-1 at this point in time. Our troops are in good shape for now, but morale is slowly starting to waver as we have been slowly losing ground. Most of the civilians want Yagura gone, but with so many shinobi against us, the most they are willing to do is secretly provide us with food and medicine. In all honesty, if we can't win at least one major victory and soon, things will come crashing down around our ears and the rebellion will fail. The worst part is that if Yagura wins, it will not bode well for countries like Hai no Kuni and Kaminari no Kuni who have well-known bloodlines." Sitting back in their chairs, the two Konohamanin took their time sorting through the information they had just received. Itachi turned to Ikari and raised an eyebrow at him, to which he responded by shrugging. Turning back to the Kirinin, he slowly nodded his head. "If we assist you and you win, have you given any thought to who will become the new Mizukage? Also, what are you offering for our services as we are here in an off-the-books mission because of the chance of capture?" The two Mist Ninja looked at each other and nodded, and then Mei looked at both of them. "Once we win, I will more than likely become the Godai Mizukage. As far as what you would receive in return for your services, I am afraid that we won't be able to afford to give you much in return. I am inclined to offer an alliance with Konoha with very favorable terms, but other than that I can't really offer much else." Sharing a quick glance, the two younger ninja nodded. "That is acceptable. Perhaps we could receive a favor redeemable at a later date instead of direct payment, but nothing too unreasonable, of course." "That is indeed acceptable. I am guessing that Ikari-san here is the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune?" Simply smirking at her, Ikari bowed slightly. "Indeed, I am Mei-san. I compliment you on your deductive reasoning." Smiling brightly at the young man, she nodded her head once. "If that is all for your questions, I suggest we all get ready for tomorrow, as that is when our ship returns for us. We leave at daybreak." Before they got up to go, Ikari flared his chakra twice and then there were two puffs of smoke that appeared in front of him. Glancing down at his two summons, he spoke quietly. "Anything to report?" "Nothing, Ikari-sama. There were a few flares of chakra, but they were much further out and were separate instances. Plus they were all in the direction of Konoha." "Very well done, you two. Now I have one more task for you and it will last until we meet back up at daybreak tomorrow. Takibi, your job is to keep a watch for Mei-san and Ao-san. Shimo, the same applies for you with Itachi and me. Stay out of sight at all times, and if anyone tries anything suspicious, wake us and we'll figure out what kind of action is needed from there. Any questions?" Getting two head shakes as his answer, he smiled and turned towards Mei and Ao. "Just a small precaution enabling us to get a restful night's sleep. Takibi is a fire-oriented kitsune, just so you know if anything comes up." Thanking the young man, Mei and Ao got up and left for their own room. As soon as they had left, both of the summons left as well, leaving the two alone in their room. Lying back on his bed for a moment, Ikari sighed. Turning his head to Itachi, he frowned. "Do you think that we gave too much away at the moment?" Itachi lay back on his own bed for a bit and thought about it. "No, I don't feel like they are going to take advantage of us or anything like that. So I think that we did just fine with the level of information that we gained as well as gave away. Before we go to sleep tonight, we need to make sure we send a report to Kakashi. I will write it up if you will take care of summoning a fox to send it." "Agreed. I am just a tad bit nervous though. I've fought bandits and Nukemen before, but in an actual battle or part of a civil war? I'm not scared so much as anxious, as I know that this will be on a far larger scale than anything I have ever been through before." Itachi turned to look at the young man that he regarded as part of his own family. "I trust you to do what you feel is truly right. It isn't all that uncommon to feel that way. All it means is that you are human. What you need to worry about is when you feel nothing at all, for that is when you have truly lost all touch with humanity." Exhaling heavily, Ikari turned to look at Itachi and smiled slightly. "Thanks, Itachi, I appreciate that greatly. I suppose that we should get that report written up so Aniki can get it sent to the Hokage along with his own report." Closing his eyes for a moment, Ikari thought back to the conversation he had had with his family the night before he had left. It had been extremely nerve-wracking as he wasn't too certain how well the topic would go over. It had involved what he and Miyuki-chan had discussed earlier that day. Flashback start. He had just gotten home and was putting the finishing touches on a few notes for a jutsu he was trying to finish, when he sighed and stretched out for a minute. Taking a gander at the clock, he saw that he had about an hour before anyone would start to show up, and he remembered what his Ka-san had asked of him. Wrapping up what he had been working on, he put the scroll into a seal that was tattooed on his wrist and sat on his bed. Relaxing, Ikari quickly entered his mindscape and found Miyuki lying out in the sun in her kitsune form. Approaching her, he lay down with his head on her flank, just soaking in the closeness he felt. After a few minutes of this, he gently shook her awake and lay still while she woke up and shifted to her human form. In short order, he was lying there with his head in her lap, and she had her hands running through his hair. Smiling up at her, he gently cleared his throat. "What was that you wanted to talk with me about earlier, Ka-san?" Returning his smile, she sighed softly as she looked off into the distance. "I know how alone you have been most of your life, and I know that you desire a large and loving family. What would you say if I told you that there is a way for you to ensure not only your bloodline, but to ensure that your wives would live as long as you will, and also enjoy the slower aging effects that you will?" As he considered the option, his eyes became rather unfocused, and thus he didn't notice as Miyuki laid a motherly kiss on his forehead. He was lost in thought about it for a few minutes and finally shook his head and refocused his eyes on her. "What exactly does this entail? I'm sure that whatever the actual process is, it won't be painless." Shaking her head sadly, she frowned a bit. "No, unfortunately. It is a rather simple process, and it involves you channeling my chakra into your partner after biting them. It won't leave a mark, but it requires physical contact for at least 8 hours after you channel enough of my chakra into them so that I can work through the required changes to their blood and body. I won't be changing as much, so they will still be related to their parents and not to you, but I would need to do it soon, at least in the case of Setsuki." Growing concerned, Ikari looked up at her with a slight frown. "I only have 2 questions, Ka-san. First is, when you say physical contact, what exactly do you mean? Second, just why would you need to do this sooner for Setsuki than you would need to for someone else?" Miyuki chuckled at his questions. "Your first question is rather easy to answer. All you would need to do is sleep next to each other, preferably holding each other close. The second one is a touch more complicated, as the reason for needing to do it sooner is because on the off chance that Setsuki actually activates her Sharingan, it would take far more of my chakra than would be safe for her to have in her system, and it would more than likely kill her. So if you think about it, not only does she gain all the benefits from your bloodline, but she also goes from maybe gaining her Sharingan, to definitely gaining the Sagi if we do this." He laid there stunned for a few minutes before snapping out of it. Looking up at her with gratitude, he sat up and tackled her in a hug, all the while mumbling his thanks to her for her kindness and care. She simply hugged him back, rocking him back and forth until it was nearly time to get ready to receive the guests for dinner that night. Flashback end. Ikari smiled to himself as he remembered the reactions he had gotten from everyone who had participated in that particular conversation. He would admit to a certain level of nervousness since Setsuki was going to give him her answer once he got back from this mission. Hoping that she would say yes, he shook his head to clear it and sat up. "You about done with that report, Itachi?" Getting a nod from his older partner, he quickly ran through the process of summoning, and a one-tailed fox popped up. "Greetings, Ikari-sama, you have something for me to do?" Picking up the small kitsune and scratching behind her ears, he chuckled as he spoke to her. "Yes, Yuri-chan, I do indeed. Here in a few minutes, once my partner here is done, I need you to take the report that he is writing to Hatake Kakashi. I want you to ensure that no one else but Uzuki Uegao is around when you deliver it. Stealth is essential, so that's why I summoned you, because you are the sneakiest kitsune I know next to Miyuki-chan." Giggling softly, Yuri nodded and lay down in his lap, enjoying his attention for the moment. Itachi smiled slightly as he took in Ikari leaning back against the wall with Yuri lying on his lap. It never ceased to amaze him how big a heart the young man had, especially with how badly he had been treated growing up. Clearing his throat to get Ikari's attention, he watched as the young man's eyes snapped open. "I'm ready to send the report, are you ready?" Nodding his head, Ikari leaned forward and stretched his hand out. Once he had the scroll in hand, he held it out for Yuri to grab hold of it. One last scratch of her ears and she was gone in a puff of smoke. Standing and stretching, the young man smiled at his sensei. "I'm going to grab some food before turning in, care to join me?" Taking a moment to consider this, Itachi nodded. "That, and I would like to discuss a few different seals I have thinking about to see if they could be modified in different ways." Shrugging his shoulders as he led the way out of their room, Ikari just smiled. "I'm sure they could be, as Fuinjutsu is probably among the strongest and most flexible, if not the most versatile, of the ninja arts. Early next morning, having gotten used to a funky sleep schedule was a huge benefit for Ikari, as he awoke in plenty of time to shower and was downstairs getting a large breakfast order placed by the time everyone else was there. Getting a couple of warm chunks of raw liver, he greeted his summons. "Ohio Shimo, Takibe. I trust that everything went well last night?" "Hi Ikari-sama. There was only one isolated incident, but we quickly managed to root it out before it became a problem." After hearing about the root possibly getting involved where they shouldn't be, Ikari sighed mentally. "Very well done you two, here's your reward for such good work." Holding out his hands, he allowed them each to eat the chunks of liver, channeled some water nature chakra and washed his hands of the residue, and then scratched their ears a bit. "One last thing you do, I need one of you to relay a message to your eldest sister. I need you to let her know that her services might very well be needed in the not-too-distant future." He looked at both of them, trying to impress upon them the importance of this message. Shimo and Takibe simply nodded. "Hi Ikari-sama. You do realize though that Shiny Banan is going to ask for you to start learning Senjutsu soon if you do summon her here, right?" Sighing aloud this time, he nodded. "I know, and soon I won't be able to turn her offer down, but that is not an issue for the moment. Now go back home and ensure that she gets my message." They popped away, leaving everyone at the table staring at the young man. "What?" was his response as he sat there blinking in confusion at everyone there. Itachi was the one who responded in humorous undertones. "I believe that the cause for shock in this case is the fact that no one ever knew that any of the other summoned families besides the toads and the snakes could teach the art of Senjutsu to their summoner." He then looked to the other two that were there and received nods from the both of them. Mei cleared her throat and shook her head before speaking up as well. "There's also the fact that you are quite possibly the youngest person I have ever heard of being able to summon, let alone being taught the sage arts." Her voice was soft and respectful as she spoke, somehow also filled with awe at the strength this young man possessed. Chuckling lightly, Ikari simply nodded at them. "Well, dig in before it gets cold. We need to be at our best, so I woke a little early and arranged for this spread." Throughout the meal everyone was discussing the upcoming trip and what they should expect from their hosts. They learned about how the seven swordsmen of Kiri had attempted a coup to try and overthrow Yagura and how the attempt had failed. Most of them had then disappeared, with the exception of Ringo Yuri and Chojuro, who had both joined the rebellion to aid Mei. When he heard this, Ikari got a gleam in his eyes as he thought about getting the opportunity to spar with one of the seven swordsmen. He continued to listen as they spoke about other issues that they had come across, like the extermination of the Kaguya and Yuki clans and their bloodlines. It was while they were finally leaving the town and out to sea that he got up the courage to ask about what their bloodlines were that he got the shock of his life. "Mei-san, can you tell me a little bit about the two clans and what their bloodlines were?" Ikari stood at the railing, enjoying the sea breeze that was blowing in his face while they talked. Her eyes closed. Mei mentally shrugged as she thought about whether or not she should be talking about these things when she realized it really couldn't do any harm. The Kaguya had the ability to call their bones out from their body in various ways, either as weapons or as ways of entrapping their foes. The Yuki clan was able to utilize one of the sub-elemental chakra as their bloodline, much like my own family. The Terumi clan has the ability to use both Yutan and Futon sub-elements as part of our Kekkei Genkai. Here the young smiled as he thought about what her elemental affinities were. "So you're very similar to me then. I was given a new bloodline by the Baiju that I contain the ability to use the Shikutan and Hutan sub-elements." He trailed off for a moment when he sensed that she was staring at him. Opening his eyes and looking at her face, Ikari was surprised to see the look of shock on her face. "What's wrong, Mei-san?" Shaking her head, she turned her head to look back out to sea. The sub-element of the Yuki clan was Hutan. Realizing that he might have brought up some bad memories, he sighed. "Gomen Mei-san, as I did not mean to remind you of anything bad." Waving his concerns off for the moment, she turned back to him. "You couldn't have known Ikari-san. I will say this though, you will find it much easier to use your Hutan abilities while in Mizuno Kuni, seeing as it will be easier for you to draw out water from the surrounding area to use in your jutsu." Taking a moment to consider this new revelation, Mei was struck by an idea. "Say Ikari-san, what would you say to receiving copies of any jutsu that they had, if we can find any of their scrolls?" Growing wide-eyed for a moment, Ikari stopped to think about it for a bit. "Will this be in lieu of my receiving a favor for later?" The red-haired woman immediately shook her head. "No, this will be a bonus of sorts, as there is no guarantee of there even being anything of theirs still around." Bowing ever so slightly, Ikari drew her attention back towards him. "Even if we find nothing to help me, I will be honored to help in any way I can." Stunned for a few seconds, Mei turned to look at the young man. "Why would you put yourself out there for us even foregoing any type of payment?" Standing up straight, he headed for where their quarters were on the ship. That's quite simple, because it is the right thing to do. Chapter 3, The Civil War in Kiri Part 1. 3 months later. Grunting as he finished his most recent spar, Ikari smiled as he sheathed his swords and wiped his brow. Bowing to Amayuri as she reciprocated his actions, they took a seat and relaxed. That was intense, Amayuri-san. If you had to honestly rate my abilities in Kenjutsu, where would you say I'm at? Taking a moment to slug down some water, Amayuri thought about what the young man had said. 3 months ago when she had first met him and the rest of his comrades from the Leaf, she had chuckled to herself thinking that the child was just playing at being a ninja. Then a month into their stay, he had been one member of a two-man team that had been set out to assist them when she and 3 others had been ambushed on a medicine and food run. Flashback start. Cursing up a storm, Amayuri sliced through yet another kunai thrown at her. She had managed to hold off the attackers for a while now, enabling the rest of her team to get out and hopefully make it back to the base with the food and medicine. Running on fumes as far as her chakra was concerned, she was almost desperate enough to consider making this her last stand and taking out as many as she could before going down as well. That was when she saw 5 figures blur past her into the trees where she had seen at least 10 of her attackers lash out at her from, and then heard a young voice scream Idana Bakuatsuhayo a Bunshine. Then there was a flash of blue light and the sound of multiple explosions as the figures turned a bluish-white color and shattered, sending fist-sized shards of ice into the surrounding woods. By the sounds she heard afterward, there must have been at least 5 of her enemies that were either dead or wounded. Right after that she saw a 3-tailed kitsune race past her and take up a protective stance in front of her, and then felt a presence at her side. Turning to look, she saw one of their few medic ninja and smiled a tiny bit. Getting a nod in return, she broke for cover, and took a breather. The kitsune tilted its head toward her and spoke in a low voice. "How many of your attackers are left? Be quick so I can assist my summoner." Taking a quick moment to count in her head, she rapidly did the math and replied, 5 to 7, all either Jonin or Anbu level. Let your summoner know that as soon as I have recovered a bit of my chakra we will be leaving. I just wish we could leave no survivors, because the people will be punished for assisting us. Nodding his head really quickly, she heard him growl and bark a number of times before hearing a faint response. Cocking her head to one side, she looked at the fox in front of her in a questioning manner. Chuckling as he felt her look at him, he spoke quickly before leaving in a hurry. I just told my brothers and sister to leave no survivors, so don't worry about that. Once you're ready, head out and we will cover your retreat. While she waited for the medic to finish healing her more severe wounds, she dug around in one of her pouches, and finding one last soldier pill, popped it into her mouth. Once she was healed enough to move, she quickly stood and nodded her thanks to the medic. Hearing a scream of pain, she turned her head to look in the direction she had heard it come from and then heard another shout, Shakuten, Shakunetsu no Ryu Hinatama. The next thing she saw was a white-hot fire dragon form from the flames coming out of the young boy's mouth, only to watch it spit out 3 fireballs the size of boulders. That combined with the screams of the 3 dying enemies convinced her it was time to leave and immediately ran after the medic ninja. 10 minutes later, as they were making their way back, she was stunned to watch as 5 kitsune took up position around them and the one in the lead, a 5-tail, was carrying what appeared to be the young boy that had come to help from the Leaf. Flashback end. Chuckling to herself, she saw Ikari's eyebrow rise at her mirth. Shaking her head, she sighed and looked at him. To be honest, I was just remembering the day my opinion of you changed, that day that you and your kitsune saved my ass a few months back. I would honestly say that if you were one of ours, I would be doing whatever it took to get you as my apprentice to become one of the Kiri no Shinobi Gatana Shichinin Shu. You are currently at or around low Anbu level with your blades, and have an almost uncanny ability to read what your opponent is going to do before they do it. Blushing lightly at the glowing praise and recommendation, Ikari bowed his head to her. Arigato gozaimasu, Amayuri-san. Your assessment is much appreciated, as is your honesty. Waving her hand at him as they both stood, she simply shrugged off his words. You asked for an honest opinion, and I am nothing if not blunt about the way I speak my mind. I call them like I see them, and if you ever change your mind about staying in Konoha, come see me after this civil war is won and I will ensure that you get a place here. Chuckling lightly at her comment, he shook his head. I highly doubt that my fiancé would agree with that, all things considered. Especially since her clan and family all live in Konoha. Shaking her head in amusement, she laughed aloud. Engaged at 10, huh? Was it a pre-arranged betrothal of some sort? Grinning up at her, Ikari nodded slightly. Something like that, as I am the only member of my clan and bloodline remaining. The council has enacted the CRA for me, and to be honest I am grateful that it was one of my friends that I was engaged to. That alone makes it easier for me, especially since I won't have to be pressured or forced into any arrangements with women or girls that I may not even like or want to be with. Grimacing slightly, Amayuri shook her head and shuddered. Better you than me, That's all I'll say about that particular subject. We'd best be heading out to see if there is anything going on. 6 months later, having proven to be a superior swordsman, Ikari found himself teamed up with Amayuri and Chojuro quite often on missions. All too often, at least in the beginning, he had been caught in the middle of the two, seeing as how Amayuri was an outspoken and brash woman, and Chojuro was lacking in self-confidence and rather meek to boot. Now 6 months later, they were a fluid and efficient team. Having spent a lot of their off time together, he had somehow managed to calm Amayuri down and built up Shojiro's confidence in himself, and they had both imparted quite a bit of experience to the young man. They had provided the refining and polish that the young man had needed to truly shine. At the current point in time, they were all heading back from a successful infiltration mission, which had gotten them some very interesting information on the actual numbers of Yagura's forces. They were all joking and laughing when there was a near-silent gasp from Amayuri that drew both of the others' attention. They both stopped and turned to look at her and saw that she was staring at a copy of the Elemental Country's bingo book. Moving so that they could both look at what had her so shocked, they were shortly stunned as well. There, staring up at them from the unknown affiliation section, was Sojin Ikari while wearing his fox mask, staring back at them. The Hokage's office. Sarutobi Hiruzen had been calmly reading his Icha novel after having finished his paperwork when an envoy popped into his office. Bowing to the Hokage, he failed to notice what was in his hands, thus allowing the Hokage to salvage his dignity. Report. Handing him an open bingo book, he pointed to the page it was open to. Hiruzen frowned as he realized just who they were talking about. Alias, Chino Akuma Kitsune. Name, unknown. Age, 12 to 13. Village, unknown. Date of birth, unknown. Blood type, unknown. Height, 5 ft. Weight, 100 pounds. Bloodline, Huton/Sheikuten. Threat rank, B. Abilities Taijutsu, unknown. Genjutsu, Chunin/Jonin. Ninjutsu, Jonin. Kenjutsu, Jonin/Anbu. Known elemental affinities: wind, fire, water. Wanted dead or alive: Kiri, 500,000 Ryo. Wanted in Kiri for aiding and abetting the rebel faction, as he has killed 10 Anbu, 20 Jonin, and 37 Chunin, all in the name of the rebels. Is especially lethal with his twin Kadachi. Be cautious and never approach him one-on-one, as he knows multiple jutsu that point to him having multiple bloodlines, similar to Terumi Mei. Has been seen with 2 of the Kiri no Shinobi Gatanashi Chininshu, Amayuri Ringo, and Chojuro. If he is seen with the 2 of them, flee on sight. Exhaling heavily, he sat back in his chair for a moment. Turning to the Anbu, he looked at them for a moment and then sighed again. They're fishing for information, are they? His frown returned as he thought about his course of action at this point in time. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything that they could do at this point in time. Mizuno Kuni, Rebel Base. As soon as they got done reading the entry, they all leapt back into the trees and hightailed it back to base. Once there, they went their separate ways, and Ikari took a copy of the bingo book and went looking for his Aniki. 10 minutes later, he found him leaving the armory, and Ikari fell in step alongside his brother figure. After a couple minutes of silence, Kakashi figured out that something was bothering the young man, and calmly placed a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong, Ototo? Is there something bothering you?" Nodding, he handed his Aniki the bingo book. Not comprehending what was going through his mind at the moment, Kakashi idly flipped through it to the Konoha section and didn't see anything amiss. Turned to the unknown affiliation section, B-rank threats. Shrugging as he still hadn't quite connected the dots, he turned to the aforementioned section, and stopped suddenly as he saw the first person listed. Stunned, he read through the listing and smiled to himself as he got to the end. Moving along towards the living area that they had set up for themselves, he studied Ikari to see what his true thoughts were on the matter. "So how do you feel about this?" All he got in response was a head shake and a half-hearted shrug. "Don't honestly know what to think or feel about it, to be honest. The first thing that came to mind was that I'd somehow compromised our village, at least until I saw where they had me listed. Then there was the fact that they somehow had someone survive one of the missions I had been on to have as thorough a listing as they did." So absorbed in his thoughts and what he was saying that he didn't even notice when Yuigao and Itachi had joined them. Kakashi had wordlessly handed off the book to them, ensuring that it was open to the correct section. "I think that it's pretty nifty that I'm only 11 and already people consider me to be a B-rank threat, though it does make my life a bit more dangerous. I'm just grateful that there isn't anything in there about my dojutsu. Wouldn't you agree, Aniki?" It was at this point that he looked up and noticed that his other 2 comrades had joined them. Smiling slightly at them, he nodded at the book and looked at them in a questioning manner. Quickly getting the idea of what he was asking, they all nodded at him while smiling at the same time. Yuigao was the first one to speak up, hesitantly though, as she didn't want to offend Ikari. "So how do you feel about it? You know, actually being in the bingo book. Pausing as they had reached their initial destination, he smiled sadly. In a way it's kinda neat, that someone who doesn't know me can rate my skills in such a manner. To be blunt, I figured that either it would be some time before I actually became a target in such a manner, or I would only merit a C-rank threat at most starting out. Sighing as he collapsed backwards on his bed, he watched as everyone gathered around him as he thought out what he was going to say. It's also kinda nerve-wracking at the same time, knowing that someday soon I could be fighting off people who are only after my bounty, you know? Ikari ran a hand over his face, and laughed as a thought struck him. I guess I will just have to keep on getting stronger, so that I can protect not only those who are precious to me, but also to protect myself, ni? Everyone laughed at that, with the exception of Itachi, who just smiled broadly at the young man who would be related to him sooner or later. The raven-haired man leant back in his seat for a moment and looked at Ikari. So how'd your most recent mission go? Looking at Itachi with a grateful smile, they passed away the remaining time until dinner comparing notes on their most recent missions. The next day, whistling softly to himself as he headed off to the east of the base to train, Ikari was lost in thought as he walked along. He had prepared for this by summoning a couple of two-tailed kitsune to watch over him to ensure that he wasn't snuck up on or attacked. Enjoying the rarity of a day off from missions was a luxury he fully intended to take advantage of as they were so few and far between at the moment. Talking with his tenant at the moment, Ikari was discussing the details of being trained in Senjutsu. The pros and cons of the training were what were weighing on his mind at the moment. So the main difference in the way that the Kitsune and the Gamma clans teach their summoner how to achieve Sage Mode is that the Kitsune teach it as a way of fighting meditation, while the Gamma teach it through being still and gathering it through meditating, right? His Kasan nodded at this as she smiled before continuing with the impromptu lesson on Senjutsu and Senin Moto. That's correct, Ikari-kun. There are some definite benefits to Sage Mode as you will come to discover. The first and one of the best, is that your ninjutsu and genjutsu will be far more powerful due to adding nature chakra to your attacks. The second is that once you have mastered Sage Mode, that when you exit said mode, that your reserves will once again be full. That is a natural side effect of the act of meditation and adding nature chakra to your normal chakra. There might even be a way to add my chakra to the mix, but that is something that we will discuss at a much later date. I feel confident and comfortable enough with your ability to use up to 2 tails of my chakra safely, and it won't be until you can use 6 tails and maintain control of your emotions that we will talk about trying out such things. Nodding to himself, he stumbled as he tripped over an opening in the ground, and quickly recovered and shook his head as he looked around. Finally looking down, as he had not seen or felt anyone around, Ikari noticed a narrow set of stairs leading down into the ground at a rather gentle angle. Whistling under his breath, he peered down and saw that there weren't any light sources down below. As he was looking down, he felt one of the kitsune brush against his hand, and he spared a second to look and see who it was. The golden fur gave her away as Yuna, one of his personal favorites as far as the kitsune were concerned. Running a hand through her fur, he pointed towards the opening in front of them. "Can you give me some light and let your nose lead the way for me, Yuna?" Getting a nod in turn, she curled her tails and let some fire nature chakra flow to the tips, creating a pair of living torches. Looking up at her summoner and getting a nod and a smile, she turned and led the way down. The walls looked like they had been cut with blades of wind, and there were no doors or anything remotely resembling a door frame. They continued on and after a half an hour, Yuna spoke up. "Ikari-sama, the scent that I'm getting is unusual to say the least. Until now all I could smell was the earth and stone all around us. Now I smell the wind, almost like from a mountain top, and some sort of avian scent." Nodding in response once again, Ikari looked ahead and saw that there was an opening that led into an area that was much wider and more open than the passageway that they were in. Holding up at the entry, he looked around and saw that there was a massive amount of engraving on the walls, and as he stepped into the room and looked closer, he was stunned by the level of detail that was present. The only thing that he could see was that there were many birds in various poses, each of them birds of prey. Ikari was brought out of his musings by Yuna, who had yipped at him and drew his attention to a pedestal that was artfully carved into the wall directly across from the entryway. Approaching it cautiously, Ikari noticed a rather large scroll that looked eerily familiar to him. As he looked at it, it occurred to him that this scroll was a summoning scroll. Turning to Yuna, he tilted his head in thought for a moment before meeting her gaze. "Is it possible to hold more than one summon contract as a summoner, Yuna-chan?" Sitting back on her haunches for the moment, Yuna sighed. "Technically, yes it is. The hard part about it is that you need both bosses to agree to it. Before I say whether or not Shinobana-sama will even think about agreeing or even considering the possibility, you will need to open the scroll and see exactly what summon the scroll is for." Nodding absently as he turned to the scroll, Ikari quickly unfurled it and looked through it. There were only a handful of signatures there and they were so faded as to be illegible. Glancing at it once more, he quickly figured out which summon it was for. Looks to be for the Washi clan. Do you think that shiny Bana-sama will go for it? Quickly getting over her shock, she rapidly nodded. The Eagles have always been one of our clan's allies, and I don't foresee any issues with it. You will need to summon her to ask before signing it though. Smiling at her, Ikari grabbed the scroll and proceeded to leave the same way they had come. Once they were out of the passage, he turned to look at it only to see solid ground once more. Quirking an eyebrow at the strangeness of it, he ran through the hand seals and slammed his bloody hand into the ground. Kushios no Jutsu. A large cloud of smoke popped into existence and cleared away rapidly. Standing there in front of him was a horse-sized dark blue kitsune with 8 tails waving behind her. Greetings shiny Bana-sama, I have summoned you here for a rather unusual request. The rather large vixen smirked as she looked down at her clan summoner, as he had his head bowed out of respect for not only her, but her mother as well. Settling down into place, she laid out in front of him, setting her head down on her paws. Greetings to you as well, Ikari-kun, and to you as well Yuna. What is this request you have for me? Raising his head and settling down on the ground as well, Ikari held the scroll out in front of himself resting on both of his palms. While discussing the Senjutsu training with Kasan this morning, both Yuna-chan and I came across a rather unusual opening in the ground. Deciding to check it out for potential threats, we ran into a large room that was most beautifully engraved with many different birds of prey in quite a few different positions. Yuna here discovered a pedestal and on it I found this scroll that contains the contract for the Washi clan. I then asked her if it was possible to be the summoner for more than one clan, and she told me that it is up to the discretion of the boss summons for each clan. Quietly taking a deep breath, he licked his lips as unobtrusively as possible before continuing. It was my desire to know if you would allow this, as I desire the power and ability to protect all those precious to me, and having another clan to summon would be of no small assistance in accomplishing this. Tilting her head slightly after getting past the amazement that he had actually found one of their long-lost allies summoning contracts, she held the young man's gaze. Looking into his eyes, she could see the courage that it had taken for him to ask this of her, as well as the desire to grow stronger. As she contemplated his request, the vixen tested his patience and resolve by holding her tongue as she considered his request. Staring at the young Ningen, she considered what she knew of him. He was young, honorable to a fault, definitely very strong in spite of his youth, and he never lorded it over others despite his rough beginnings. Smiling to herself, she knew that this would prove beneficial to both their clans and she nodded. Ikari-kun, I will allow this, as in the time that you have been our summoner you have proven both your honor and loyalty to us. I know that you would not favor one of us over the other. All I ask is that since you will have multiple mates, that you allow your first mate to sign the contract with the Washi clan, your second mate with the Kitsune and your third with whichever she so desires. Is this agreeable to you? Exhaling softly, Ikari smiled gently as he nodded his head. Yes, it is agreeable, although I do have a small favor to ask in behalf of another. I shall wait to do so once the boss of the Washi is here before us. Without further prompting, he bit his thumb and signed the scroll after unrolling it. Glancing at his hand to ensure that there was still enough blood on it, he then focused on the Eagle's contract as he ran through the summoning process once more. Another large cloud of smoke appeared, and there was a sudden sharp wind that blew it away, accompanied by the shrill cry of a large eagle. As Soyokaze was gazing around, he took in the two kitsune in front of him as well as the young human. Turning to Shiny Bana, he nodded his head and greeted her first. Greetings to you, might I ask your name? I am Soyokaze, lord of the Washi clan, and it has been over 1,000 years since the last time anyone has summoned me or mine to this plane. Grinning widely, the elder of the two kitsune raised her head and body so that she was sitting on her haunches. Greetings to you as well Soyokaze-sama, I am Shiny Bana, eldest daughter to Miyuki who was the former ruler of the kitsune. She is still alive and is present in a way. Sojin Ikari, stand and present yourself. Turning and facing the young man as she spoke, she drew attention to the human present. Gulping silently as he stood, Ikari bowed to both of the bosses. Greetings to the both of you, Soyokaze-sama, Shiny Bana-sama. My name is Sojin Ikari, Chunin of Kanahagakure no Sato, Jinchuriki of the Kyubi no Kitsune, and summoner of the Kitsune clan. It is my hope and desire to be able to summon both of your clans to aid me and mine in our times of need. Stunned at his frank and honest admission, the eagle looked over to the fox as his eyes widened. Receiving a subtle nod of her head in answer to his unasked question, he then turned his attention to the young man standing before the both of them, still patiently bowing to them. Rise young one, and tell me how you came to be the Jinchuriki to the strongest of the Baiju and also how you came upon our summoning contract. Once I have heard your honest answer, I will judge whether you will be allowed the privilege to summon my clan and I." Over the next hour or so, they sat there and listened as Ikari answered their questions about how he had become the Jinchuriki to Miyuki, his former parents' rather sickening plans, and all about his new bloodline and clan. They also discussed his training, both past and present, as well as his current situation here in the mist. Once they had finished, everyone sat there in silence and digested all that they had heard and discussed. Turning to his counterpart, the eagle nodded and then faced the young human once more. "I have decided that we, the Washi clan, will answer your call and will become summons of the Sojin clan, alongside our allies of old, the Kitsune clan. If you have need of one of us, you must focus on which clan you wish to call upon, or otherwise you will get both clans. There is a way around this, however, at least when you are not in the heat of battle, and that will require the agreement of all three of us. If you agree to this, both Shiny Bana-sama and I will channel a portion of our chakra and touch one of your forearms. Doing this will form a tattoo of sorts that will eliminate the need for hand seals, as all you will need is the blood to wipe across the mark, and to channel the appropriate level of chakra needed for whomever you wish to summon." Sitting down heavily as it hit him that he had two clans he could summon from, the young Sojin heir thought about what he had just been told. Putting his agreement to their proposal to the side mentally at least, he vocalized the favor that he had been thinking of. "Pardon me for my boldness, Zoyokaze-sama, Shiny Bana-sama, but there is a boon I would ask of you. My life has been blessed by many wonderful people to care for me and train me, and all but one of them have a clan to summon of some type or another." Here he bowed his head and closed his eyes as he thought about Yuigao-chan and how much she had done and still did for him in his life. Raising his head to look both of the bosses in the eye, he smiled gently as he thought about what he was about to say before speaking. "The woman who currently represents my clan in the council is not related to me by blood, but she is closer to me than any in my former family, so much so that I see her as my Onsen and address her as such. It would be an honor if I could persuade one of you to allow my Onsen to sign one of your contracts, as I would never allow any other to sign them unless they were my mates or children without your permission." Absolute silence was his response, and all he could focus on at that particular moment in time was keeping his breathing calm and slow. If he had been looking at the summons there in front of him, he would have been surprised to see the looks of astonishment on their faces. Swiftly schooling their features, they turned to one another and smiled slightly. After a few more minutes of waiting just to mess with him, they nodded and Zoyokaze spoke up. "Your respectful manner and the esteem in which you hold this woman is very telling, Ikari-san. I only have one question, and this will more than likely determine which of our clans will respond if your sister calls upon us. What is her elemental affinity?" Looking up and quickly assuming a neutral tone to his face as he did so, Ikari directed his gaze towards the eagle. "Her affinity is to fire, Zoyokaze-sama." Shiny Bana was up next with her own question. "If you had to determine where her strengths as a kunoichi are, what would you tell us?" Taking a moment, Ikari thought about it and then asked for clarification. "Do you mean specifically or in general what I feel her strengths are?" She immediately replied, "Both specifically and in general. Be brutally honest with us so that we can make the best decision possible." 3 hours later. Immediately upon reaching the base, Ikari sent 3 of his kitsune to find his comrades and bring them to the nearest training ground. Once he had arrived there, he set up an area large enough to contain what was going to happen and prepared for the others' arrival. While he waited for them to arrive, he sat down in the lotus position and began to meditate simply to calm his mind and center himself once more, while at the same time ensuring that he had recovered enough chakra to accomplish his goal here today. 5 minutes later he had sensed their chakra approaching his position and he stood to greet them while at the same time creating 10 clones and positioning them in the spots he had set up before they had arrived. Once they were in front of him, he nodded to his clones and they ran through the designated hand seals simultaneously, activating the chakra containment and privacy seals. Once they were done, they then transformed into rocks and awaited their creator's next command. Facing his older Anbu comrades, his friends, his family, Ikari smiled and motioned for Itachi to stand in front of him to his left and Kakashi to stand in a similar location to his right. Clearing his throat he began to speak. "As you all know, I consider each of you to be family of mine, each in your own way. Itachi, Kakashi, if you would please summon a couple of your summons, as both of the clans I am allowed to summon have requested their presence for what will be happening here today." As he spoke he received surprised nods from the other 2 men, and he managed to see the veiled look of hurt that passed through his Onsen's eyes. As the 2 men sped through the hand seals, Ikari bit both of his thumbs and channeled his chakra to his hands as he swiped the bloody digits across the tattoos that he had on his forearms. For a moment everyone there was blinded by the smoke as the summons appeared, and then blinked as soon as they were able to see again. Bowing to the bosses that were present, Ikari turned to his Onsen and smiled gently at her. "Yuigao, Onsen, today has been a wonderful day as I have gained yet another powerful ally, both for my clan as well as for Konoha. I have long wished to repay you in some form or fashion for the care and affection you have shown me growing up, much as I have done for Kakashi and Itachi. That day is today, and I have just the gift to give you." After several hours of questions given to me by Shinibana-sama and Zoyokaze-sama, "I will be granting you something that I know that you have long desired." Turning around and bowing once more to the boss of the Washi clan, as he stood back up he held out his hands and received the scroll that held the summoning contract for the Eagles. Once more he faced his adopted siblings and smiled. "Uzuki Uegao, you have been like a sister to me for several years. You have always been there for me, whether it was to scold me for my foolishness, to comfort me when I was suffering and taught me the ways of the sword. I have been authorized to allow you the privilege of becoming the secondary summoner of the Washi clan, as you are the only member of my family who doesn't have a clan to call upon when you are in need." Uegao was in shock at that moment. Pure, unadulterated shock, as she finally wrapped her head around what Ikari was offering to her. Hitting her knees was enough to bring her out of it, and she looked up at her Ototo. "You're serious about this? This isn't a joke or a prank, Ototo?" Shaking his head, Ikari knelt in front of her as he unrolled the scroll. "I would never pull a prank that would be as hurtful as this would be, Wanzan. I need you to bite your thumb and sign your name in blood, then place that hand next to your name leaving a bloody print of your hand. Then the hand seals are as follows: I, Inu, Tori, Saru, Kitsuchi," and slam your chakra-filled hand against the ground. Going through the motions as he called them out, she shakily slammed her palm into the ground and heard another summon pop into place in front of her. Opening her eyes, she saw a much smaller eagle blinking up at her. "Hello there, are you the one who summoned me here? My name is Shiakaze, what's your name?" Reaching out to touch the young summon, she steadied herself as she gently stroked the feathers on her head. Coming to her senses, she smiled gently at the young bird as she cleared her throat. "My name is Uzuki Uegao, young Shiakaze, and yes, I am one of your clan's newest summoners. It is an honor to meet you and I hope to work with you in the future." Turning to Ikari she smiled even wider even as her eyes began to tear up. Bowing her head in gratitude, she then looked to Zoyokaze and Shinibana and bowed once more. "My deepest gratitude and thanks belong to both of you, Zoyokaze-sama, Shinibana-sama. I promise you that I will always remember this day for as long as I live." Standing up, she held out her arm and motioned for her summon to join her. As the group watched Shiakaze flap her wings and take to the air so that she could take a perch with her summoner, Ikari chuckled as he took in her excitement and awe. Clearing his throat, the Washi clan leader spoke up at this point in time. "Uzuki-san, aside from our visual acuity which will assist you in reconnaissance and our ability to deliver messages, I believe that our greatest ability will lie in collaborative jutsu, since our primary affinity is to the wind, which can enhance your fire techniques. Once you are at home again, I expect the both of you to call upon us so that we can work together to find the best ways of approaching this. Until we are needed again, we will take our leave." Here he paused for a moment, giving a nod of his head to Kakashi's Ninken and Itachi's crows, who all bowed to him, and a slight bow to Shinibana who returned it. Taking one more look at his summoners, he spoke one last time. "It would appear that fortune has smiled once more upon my clan and given us strong summoners. I look forward to working with you. Farewell for now." Once he was done speaking he disappeared, starting a chain reaction with the summons popping out. After they were all gone Ikari gave a signal which told his clones that they were done and they transformed back, released the seals and then dispelled themselves. Ikari was then promptly blindsided by Uegao, who almost tackled him in a hug, mumbling her thanks over and over again. Gently rubbing her back as he smiled and congratulated her softly as he looked up at the other two members of his team, from whom he was sure that he would never hear the end of this. Shrugging mentally, he figured that he could grin and bear it, especially since it concerned his Wanzan. Once she was through thanking him she let go of him and wiped her eyes. "It means a lot to me that you would do something like this for me, Ikari-kun. I appreciate this more than I could possibly tell you, and it makes me quite proud to be your Wanzan, Ototo." Smiling up at her, he simply nodded and led the way back to the base. "I look up to each of you as my family, each of you in your own way. Itachi is like a favorite cousin, who is patient and considerate, teaching me the things that I need to succeed in life. Kakashi is like my perverted Aniki, who is humorous and keeps me on my toes while showing me how to have fun in life. Then there is you, Uegao-chan, who is like the Wanzan I have never had, who is gentle and caring, always there to pick me up when I'm down or not feeling well. That is how I view each of you in my life, and I thank Kami every day for blessing me with each of you." Everyone was chuckling as they entered the base, and it was quite relaxing to know that their already close bonds had become even closer and more tightly knit. They spent the rest of that day in fairly close quarters, just enjoying the break from the war and preparing for the next few months, as they would need to be on top of their game to make it through to go back home once more. 3 months later, Konoha, stretching as he finished dispelling the last of his clones doing paperwork, Hiruzen frowned as he went through the memories and walked over to a particular stack of and rifled through it. Once he had gotten to the one in particular that he had been looking for, he pulled it out and read through it. Sighing to himself, he rolled up the scroll and put it into a safe that only he knew about. It would seem that they were still insistent on going through with their goal of having Naruto marry his sisters, even though technically he didn't exist any longer. Lighting his pipe and sitting back in his chair, the Hokage chuckled to himself as he thought about how things were going to go down, once they were back and everything went wrong with their plans. Then there was also the look that would be on Jiraiya's face when the young men wouldn't be willing or able to sign the Dode contract, all because of their treatment and abandonment of the boy. This is going to be a sight to see, especially if Hikari-kun is able to finish his Fuji no Mai, especially since it doesn't require seals, so they can't complain that he has stolen their clan technique. Shaking his head as he envisioned what that match would be like, he rose from his seat and left his office chuckling as he thought about what was going to happen when those 6 idiots simply decided to drop in and try to claim him as kin. Frowning as he thought about who he was going to have replace him as the Hokage in a few years, he exhaled a rather impressive smoke ring. There was no chance in hell that he would allow Minato to return and take the position back, and he definitely wasn't going to allow Jiraiya or Tsunade the opportunity either. That narrowed his options down to 2 people at the current moment in time, and that was Hatake Kakashi and Uchiha Itachi. Even he would be the first to admit that he was leaning towards the Uchiha, especially given his loyalty to the village and his ability to bring out the best in those around him. Kakashi on the other hand, well, he was the lesser of the 2 choices, considering the fact that unless it was for a mission he was habitually late, always had his nose stuck in one of the orange books, and was more than just a little bit on the lazy side. If it came down to it, Hiruzen knew that he could be trusted to fulfill the position. It was just that he was his absolute last choice if all else failed. Sighing once more, he decided to visit the Ichirakus and take in a couple bowls of miso ramen before heading home and retiring for the night. He knew that there would still be time to decide which of them would be best for the job later. Chapter 4, Civil War in Kiri Part 2. 11-year-old Sojin Ikari stretched as he woke up and recalled what was going on today. Thinking back over the last year and all they had accomplished, and also how much he missed being home. Gently fingering the latest scroll from home, he sighed and got up out of bed. Now wasn't the time to think about matters at home and daydream about his betrothed. Going about his morning business, he jogged out of the tent, limbering up his muscles as he headed to the headquarters tent for the briefing. Calming his thoughts as he slowed to a walk, he swept aside the door to the tent and managed to make his way towards the briefing room, where he greeted several other ninja before approaching his teammates. Getting various nods and mumbled greetings, Ikari took a seat nearby and waited for the briefing to begin. Looking around the room, he met the gaze of Amayuri and Chojuro and gave each of them a nod and a grin, which was returned rather quickly. Just as he was about to wave them over, he watched as both Ao and Mei walked through the door and immediately headed to the front of the room. Gazing out at all the teams and the team leader that had gathered there, Terumi Mei smiled internally. She knew that this would be the determining battle that would decide the outcome of the civil war. Looking over to Ao, she nodded once to let him know to start the briefing. All of you gather around the map and listen up. This battle should be the one that determines our fate. Whether we are ready or not, Yagura has decided to try and finish us off in one fell swoop. We will be splitting up into 2 groups. The first group will be under the command of Terumi Mei, and the team leaders will be Ringo Amayuri, Sojin Ikari, and Uchiha Itachi. Their objective will be to locate and eliminate Yagura and any of his guards. Taking a moment to look at each of them and get acknowledgement, I'll then return to the briefing. The second group will be under my command, and the team leaders there will be Uzuki Uegao, Chojuro, and Hatake Kakashi. Our objective will be twofold. The first objective will be to clear a path for the first group so that they can get in close and accomplish their task, and the second will be to hold the line and keep the enemy off their backs. Any questions? Looking out at the room and seeing eager looks on everyone's faces and many shaking heads, Ao grinned in a grim manner and looked to Mei. Taking a step or 2 forward, she gazed around the room at everyone and smirked. We will head for the walls of Kirigakure in mere hours. I am pleased with how far we've come, and just how far we will go is dependent on all of you. Our allies have been a huge boost to our efforts and have opened our eyes to the realities of the bonds that we should be forging, both here in our home as well as abroad with the other nations. Whether we have a Kekkei Genkai or not, ninja or civilian, we are all human and deserve to live and to love, and we will prove this with our victory today. As the cheers began, Ikari looked over to Mei and then toward Amayuri and nodded at both of them before motioning for Itachi to follow him. As they exited the tent, He could feel the older man's gaze fall upon him and he tilted his head as he spoke. "What is it, senpai?" Thinking as they walked towards the gate, Itachi sighed and then quickened his stride so that he was even with Ikari. "Are you certain that you are ready for this, Ikari-kun?" Frowning ever so slightly, Ikari let his shoulders sag just a little before turning his head to look at him. "Am I certain?" No, I'm not. The problem is that the longer we take to prepare, the more innocents there are that are hurt or killed, and that doesn't sit well with me at all, Itachi-senpai." Nodding as he could understand the young man's point of view, Itachi smiled slightly as they reached their destination just outside the walls of the base. "I understand, Ikari. Know that we will be there with you and you are not fighting alone." Giving the Uchiha a simple smile, Ikari thanked him. "I am going to spend some time meditating, come and get me in a couple of hours, ni?" Ruffling the young man's hair, Itachi nodded to him and returned his smile with a slight upturn of his own lips. Turning away he walked back to camp and went in search of the others. Several hours later, there were 10 of them gathered and waiting for the signal to move in and remove Yagura from the picture. Itachi had summoned a couple of crows who were currently flying overhead, while Ikari had summoned a couple of four-tailed kitsune who were close by keeping a watch for any enemies that would try to sneak up on them. Ikari and Amayuri were both sitting down back to back, meditating, while everyone else was sitting around waiting for the other team to clear the way. Kakashi had teamed up with Ao, and they were currently clearing out the guards at the gate. Slipping it open, he turned and quirked an eyebrow at Ao, only to receive a shake of the head and sign language to hold off until they had disabled the main body of shinobi in the town. Agreeing quickly, they made their way back to the other members of the team and signaled them to pull out the seal scrolls that Ikari had prepped for this very purpose. In his studies of Fuinjutsu, Ikari had learned how to modify certain types of tags in many different ways. He could change them so that they could unleash jutsu, senbon, kunai, even many different types of poison. After many weeks of study, as well as trial and error, he had even managed to get some of the weapons tags to be unleashed in specific directions. The specific seals that he had given Kakashi were of a unique design all his own, in that they contained a modified Fuuten jutsu that was unleashed after a relatively simple-to-use and counter-sleeping agent was dispersed. The agent itself worked almost instantly upon contact with any of the mucous membranes around the nose, ears and eyes. The jutsu that he used was a very low-powered Fuuten, Datappa, that was released as the agent burst into the air, allowing a much wider spread of the near-invisible powder than would normally be permissible. Breaking up into 4 smaller squads, Kakashi quickly whispered directions to the other 3 people that he handed out seals to, refreshing their memories on placement, timing, and avoidance of the agent. Moving out into the early morning darkness, Kakashi and Ao quickly located one of the few massive groups of the enemy's forces and quickly got to work. 10 minutes later, everyone in their task force regrouped and readied themselves. Giving a quick glance around, Ao nodded at Kakashi, who gave a short countdown, and they all activated their portion of the tags. One of the most complicated portions of these particular seal tags was the work that had not only incorporated the jutsu portion as well as the directional part of the seal, as the seal in its entirety was nothing short of a masterpiece. It also boasted a chakra conversion seal which converted anyone's normal chakra into wind-nature chakra, a very dilute form of the explosive seal that was needed to propel the sleeping agent. But it also included a very localized silencing seal that eliminated the noise, and managed to keep the jutsu down to where it simply felt like a quick but gentle breeze. Waiting about 5 minutes, Ao nodded to Chojuro to give the others the signal as it was now time to strike. Chojuro's smile was enough to give even Kakashi the shivers, seeing the sharp-toothed man grin from ear to ear like he'd just had. Focusing on his chakra network, he quickly flared it once, twice, paused for 3 seconds and then flared it a 3rd time. Outside the city gates. Upon receiving the signal, Ikari stood and assisted Amayuri in standing, while nodding to everyone else that was there. "It's time, Mei-san, please lead the way." Receiving a short nod and a slight smile, they quickly headed for the tower and hopefully to end this war. Once they had reached the gates, they ran into one of the others that had gone on ahead with Kakashi, who nodded to them and pointed the way before disappearing to regroup with the rest of his team. As they moved towards their target, they took down any that they came across with a thrown kunai or shuriken, doing their level best to preserve as much of their chakra for the upcoming confrontation with Yagura. They arrived at their destination about 5 minutes later, and all but Amayuri, Itachi, Mei and Ikari broke off and headed out to secure the perimeter while the others waited for them to accomplish that portion of their mission. As soon as they had cleared out any resistance, Mei led the way into the tower, followed by Ikari, Amayuri, and then Itachi. Once they reached the top and were standing outside the cage's office, Ikari held up a hand and pulled a brush and ink out of one of the seals that he had on his wrist. Rapidly he painted a seal on the door with all the grace and precision of a master artist. After he had finished and sealed away the tools, He then gestured for Mei to continue. Opening the doors, they all entered and stood in the Mizukage's office, with Mei in the center and the other three arranged in a semicircle behind her. Ikari closed the door, and took a step back so that he couldn't be easily seen and prepared to erect the seal barrier that he had personally designed. The seal, Arashi Yeshoheiki, was designed to completely enclose an area, whether interior or exterior in nature, and seal it off with an impassable barrier made up of wind and lightning nature chakra. In essence, once he activated it, nobody and nothing would be able to enter or exit the enclosed space until after he deactivated it or was killed. The best part is that any jutsu that hit it, regardless of whether from inside or outside, only served to strengthen the barrier as it absorbed the chakra from them. So this barrier was ideal for facing off against a Jinchuriki, and Ikari was waiting for the signal from Mei as to when to set it off. He spent the next minute or two observing Yagura, who had pale white blonde hair, pinkish eyes, and was rather short in stature. "Terumi Mei, so have you grown desperate enough that you would try to assault me here in my stronghold?" "No matter, I'm quite certain that as we speak your rebels are getting mopped up by my forces." Smirking wildly at the Mizukage, Mei chuckled lightly as she gave Ikari the signal he had been waiting for. Flashing through the hand seals with a speed that most Jonin would drool over, he activated the technique and the barrier quickly arose in place. A raised eyebrow was Yagura's only response as he examined the white and blue shimmering barrier of chakra. Interesting, this would appear to be a barrier seal, very impressive work for one so young. Turning his attention back to Mei, he chuckled in a low tone of voice. "I'm guessing that you won't be willing to back down and turn yourself in to face judgment." Scoffing aloud at his comment, Mei's face changed almost instantly from a smirk to an angry scowl. "When that judgment would be my death simply because I was born with a Kekkei Genkai. You're clearly losing your grip on reality if you think that I would just roll over and take something like that. Now then, shall we just get down to business?" His features settling into a grim scowl, he slowly stood and reached behind his back for his staff. Walking calmly and coolly around his desk, Yagura stood in front of her and assessed her for a moment. "As you wish, Mei-san. If you're that eager to die, then I will willingly oblige each of you in this." As the two of them were talking, Ikari activated his dojutsu and was waiting for the right time to utilize his genjutsu against his target. While he was observing their target, he got a feeling in his gut that not everything was as it seemed. Getting Itachi's attention, he flashed a message to him with hand signs. "Senpai, target may be under a genjutsu." No proof, but it might be advisable to check out. His eyes narrowing slightly, Itachi activated his Mangekyo Sharingan and looked over the current Mizukage. While unable to see the chakra network like the Byakugan did, he was able to determine the flow and effect of chakra, thus being able to copy jutsu and predict movements as well as determining whether a target was under the effects of an injutsu or genjutsu. It was due to his many years of experience that he was able to detect the very subtle and almost invisible threads that denoted the usage of a highly advanced genjutsu on the Jinchuriki Mizukage. Nodding to himself, he continued to gaze at Yagura as he signaled back to Ikari. "Confirmed, the Mizukage is indeed under a genjutsu, highly advanced and almost impossible to detect or remove. Continue with our primary objective and eliminate, strike to kill not capture." Getting into his genjutsu stance, Ikari nodded and turned his full attention to Yagura. Clearing his mind and focusing on the battle to come, he nodded to Mei who began the attack. Ripping through hand seals with great speed, she called out the name of her attack, Yotan, Yogan Ryu, and then inhaling and pushing her breath out forcefully, she unleashed a dragon formed out of lava that rushed at her target. Grimacing, Yagura whipped his staff out in front of him and started to spin it at a rapid pace with one hand, while forming one-handed seals with the other. "Suten, Mizuno Tate," was all that they heard as watched him exhale out a stream of water that merged with the spinning staff in front of him. Looking over to Aomiyuri, he nodded to her and then to the pool of water at the Mizukage's feet. Getting the hint, she grinned madly and channeled her chakra through her swords for this attack. "Raiten, Inazuma-Q," was all that she said as she spun her swords in a circle in front of her, which allowed her to shape a blue ball of lightning in front of her. Moments later she tapped the ball upwards with her offhand, and then slammed it forward with a slap from the flat of her blade in her main hand. All he could do at the moment was watch as the battle evolved and adapt to its ebb and flow. He watched as the water shield caused the dragon to hiss and then disappear, and then saw the ball of lightning strike the pool of water, shocking the Mizukage into dropping his jutsu. It was at this point that he decided that now was the best time to jump in and try to take advantage of him while his guard was down and he was distracted. Wielding a single sword in his hands, he leapt forward and swung his blade diagonally from above his head on the right to strike at Yagura. At the last possible second the Sanbi Jinchuriki managed to deflect his blade with his staff and locked it in place, where they struggled to push the other off balance. Shifting his stance ever so slightly, Ikari was in a better position to hold his blade in one hand, letting go with his offhand, and started to run through one-handed seals. Finishing on a modified Tora, he brought his hand up to his mouth as he called out his first jutsu. Sheikuten, Yari Shokiyaku. Narrowing his eyes at the younger man who apparently had a bloodline similar to Terumi Mei, the elder of the two Jinchuriki disengaged their weapons just in time to dodge the worst of the damage that would have been done from the fiery spear that blossomed forth from the young man's mouth, but not quickly enough to escape completely undamaged. As he stepped back and resumed a ready position, he quickly glanced down at his left shoulder to see a shallow but long cut that went through his outer robes. Looking back up at the Kyubi Jinchuriki, he glared as he spoke in a low tone. "You are the first person in many years to have done such damage to me, and for that you will die in a most painful and slow manner." Konoha. Satsuki shivered as she awoke from her restless slumber, and curled up around the stuffed fox plushie that her betrothed had given her before he left. Inhaling the faint scent that it had of him, she smiled as she thought about the last letter that he had sent her telling her that he would be home before she knew it and not to worry about him since he was in good company. Shaking her head as she knew that that would be the absolute last thing she would ever rid herself of, was her worry for him. She knew that once she became a kunoichi that he would worry about her just as much, and that once she had received her new bloodline that he would be taking over a huge portion of her training to ensure that she was able to defend herself. Stretching as she awoke, she got out of bed and threw on her robe before heading downstairs to the dining room. There was nothing she loved more than the freedom she had on the weekends to stay in her future home, and the young Uchiha knew that the housekeeper that they had hired enjoyed working for the both of them. With a smile on her face, she greeted Mika warmly. "Ohio Mika Oba-san, how are you this morning?" Without turning around, the older woman smiled and waved as she finished cooking for the two of them. "Ohio, Suki-chan, I am doing quite well this morning. Did you sleep well last night? You've been rather restless the last few times you've been here." Turning around and serving up the pancakes that she had been making, along with setting some tamagoyaki on the table, she smiled at the young lady and shooed her to sit at the table. Blushing as she sat down, she nodded and then cleared her throat. "Hi Oba-san, I did sleep fairly well last night, but..." She frowned as she got quiet for a moment and looked down at her hands. Picking up on the silence from her young charge, Mika sat next to her and grabbed the young girl's hands in her own. "I'm guessing it has to do with your young man and your worries for him, am I right?" Getting a nod in response, Satsuki looked up at her and squeezed their housekeeper's hands. "The feeling I got this morning as I woke was that he was in grave danger, and I can't help but wonder if he will be all right." Gently returning her squeeze, Mika sighed as she let go with one of her hands and rubbed her charge's shoulders and upper back. "It's times like these where all we can do is pray for our loved ones and keep our chin up, making sure to do our best to keep faith in them that they will return to us alive and whole. Trust me when I tell you that it was the same for me with both my father as well as my husband, and it will be the same for your young man once you are out there accomplishing missions." Smiling gently at her, she then patted her hand and motioned towards the food. "Now let's not let the food I have prepared go to waste, shall we?" Kirigakur no Sato, Mizu no Kuni. Having engaged the Mizukage in a heated exchange of blows with his swords versus the Sanbi Jinchuriki's staff for the better part of a half an hour, Ikari had to take a step back and take a breather, which was much needed considering the fact that the four of them had been going at it hammer and tongs for the better part of 2 hours before this last 30-minute stretch. Signaling to Amayuri to step in, he made the mistake of taking his eyes off his opponent for just a moment, and that was when the elder of the two Jinchuriki struck. Sliding his hands to the base of his staff, Yagura managed to pull and twist his staff towards him in such a manner that the hooked portion of his staff caught the young man's blades, and the suddenness of his move not only caught him off guard, it snapped his blades leaving him defenseless for a moment. Caught off balance, Ikari struggled to regain it and attempted to throw himself backwards and ended up being assisted in his desperate attempt by a blow from the staff, which caught him in a glancing manner in the chest, fracturing 2 of his ribs and sending him flying. By virtue of being the closest to him, Mei jumped after him and managed to keep him from flying into the barrier, while both Itachi and Amayuri managed to give them cover by engaging Yagura and keeping him busy, allowing for Ikari to have the time he needed to get back on his feet. Mei gave him a once-over, and after assuring her that all he had were a couple of flesh wounds, returned her attention to the battle in front of them. Of the 3 combatants that were currently engaged in a rather vicious melee, Itachi was the least wounded, having been waiting for the right moment to engage. Amayuri was slightly worse off, having been jumping in here and there to catch Yagura off guard to either get a hit in or distract him so that one of the others could get one in. The Mizukage though was by far in the worst shape of them all. Having realized that the barrier was an unknown variable in this battle, he knew that he couldn't risk going all out with his Baijuu cloak, as that had always made him grow huge in stature. The worst thing is that with his foe's stellar teamwork, the Sanbi, Isabu, was hard-pressed to give him any of its chakra beyond what was needed to keep his wounds healed. With a loud roar, Yagura threw all his strength behind throwing back his two attackers, and after clearing a small area around him, allowed a deep ocean blue cloak of chakra to form around him as well as one chakra tail starting to form. Hitting his knees for a moment, he started to stand back up and started to run through hand seals even faster than before. Suten, Idana Suro. Upon hearing the jutsu, Ikari threw his hands together and ran through the hand seals that he needed, all the while focusing inwards. He didn't watch as their enemy directed his chakra to the water beneath him or as it gathered into a super condensed form and roared aloud to the heavens as it took the shape of a dragon. No, his focus was completely on where his allies were and on increasing the speed of his hands to be as quick as humanly possible. Hitting the last one, he immediately bellowed out a warning to his allies, and unleashed a surge of his chakra into the water around him. Huton, Toketsu Hakai no Yari, was whispered as he took a knee and slammed his hands down and channeled his chakra into the area in front of him, watching as spears formed from the water and hardened, freezing into ice, as they grew in number forming lines that raced towards the Mizukage and his jutsu. The two jutsu collided halfway between the two Jinchuriki, and while the dragon was frozen in place and shattered, the spears kept on heading towards the Jinchuriki of the Sanbi. Maintaining his focus on the jutsu so that he could attempt to end this here and now, Ikari bellowed one last time to get his allies out of the way. Itachi, Amayuri, get out of there now. Barely moving out of the way in time, Itachi and Amayuri stood well back and watched as the spears raced towards Yagura and caught him off guard, slicing into his legs and hands. Charging forward, Amayuri and Mei both ran in and took advantage of his wounds. Amayuri held her blades to his throat crossed in front of him, while Mei slapped two seals on him. One was a chakra suppression seal that would cut him off from both his own chakra as well as his Baijua chakra, and the second seal which knocked him out and would keep him unconscious until they released the seal. Itachi made his way over to Ikari and sat down heavily next to the younger man. "Are you well, Ikari?" Shaking his head to clear it momentarily, Ikari turned and looked to the Uchiha. "Nothing wrong with me that a nice large meal and a good night's rest can't cure, but I would prefer to get looked over by a medic, just to make sure I'm not underestimating the damage I took." Sighing as he realized that he no longer had his blades, he bowed his head for a moment and then raised it once more to his teacher. Grinning sadly, he grabbed the hilts to his blades and sighed once more as he looked up at Itachi. "How the hell am I going to explain this to Yugao?" The next day, village square in Kiri. The very next day the four ninja from Konoha stood around a bound and unconscious Yagura, and they themselves were standing behind Mei, who had Amayuri and Chojuro to her left and out to her right. They were simply waiting for noon to start off with the meeting that she had planned, which would end with the public execution of Yagura. Glancing at the clock that was built into the cage tower, she noticed that it was time to begin, and taking a couple of steps forward, she cleared her throat and began to speak. "Shinobi, kunoichi, and civilians of Kiri, my name is Terumi Mei, a Jonin kunoichi of Kiri, and today I have a momentous announcement for all of you. The civil war which has plagued our land for so many years is finally over, and the Yondaime Mizukage has been apprehended for war crimes as outlined in our original village charter. The penalty for said crimes is death, and before the day is out the sentence will be carried out by one of our 7 swordsmen, Ringo Amayuri." Taking a step to the side and motioning for the other 4 to bring Yagura forward, which Ikari and Itachi did by grabbing him under the arms and walking forward, and stopping just behind where Mei was standing, resting him on his knees and keeping a hand on his shoulders. The crowd as a whole seemed to emit an aura of relief and joy that the whole war was over and done with. That's the end, guys. If you enjoyed, then make sure to leave a comment. This is Chaos Shinobi signing off.